All right, welcome back to another episode of the Optimum Drive podcast presented by The Fast Lane. I've got another great guest today. This person is near and dear to my heart. We've been very, very close friends for decades now and have been doing all sorts of things throughout the automotive industry, from racing together to teaching and really everything in between. And he's a very, very accomplished racing driver. He comes from a background of racing extensively in Europe and also in the United States, and has a lot of accolades to his name. And the thing that I really like about him is he's very articulate with a little bit of an accent, but he's very articulate about describing driving. And a lot of my book, Optimum Drive, was kind of getting processed in my head literally after having conversations with him. And even when I was going and editing the book and kind of getting it finalized, I'd go by his house and we'd sit and talk about specific details about sort of the method and the process of achieving greatness as a driver. So he had a big part to do with my book. So if you like Optimum Drive, this is the guy you should thank in a pretty big amount for it even existing. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, meet Nico Ronde. Nico, how are you, sir?
Hello, I'm doing great, and I should have you introduce me more often. This is good.
Yeah, I mean, I was joking before the podcast that I could have done like a 20-minute intro of Nico. And I literally could, because he's someone, you meet a lot of people in this business. It's a global thing, racing and driver training and all of that. And you meet people all over the world. And Nico, you're one of the sharpest minds when it comes to articulating driving and the nuances of driving and coaching, and especially in that level of where, a lot of coaches sort of run out of bandwidth once the driver gets pretty quick. You've got a mid-level pro driver maybe, or something like that, that's maybe only a tenth or two off the pace, or three. And a lot of coaches sort of tap out at that point because they may be able to actually jump in the car and do that, that pole sitting pace, but they're not as good at articulating those last few tenths of a second. Does that make sense? And so that's kind of the thing with you. I don't think you tap out at any point. Like, we could stick you with Max Verstappen today, and you would find ways to make Max faster. And that's the thing that I think that's really, really cool about your abilities. It's not just, us doing a entry-level 3-day school somewhere and being able to articulate driving to novices who've rolled in and have never been on the track before. The whole, their mind's blown at anything you say, but you can just keep on going. And to me, that's see, I told you a 20-minute intro. You can keep on going, and you can really you're welcome. You can still coach those guys, and that's the real reason. Seriously, like, as far as like my respect for you, which I think is immense. That's really where it comes from, where I know that you wipe that smirk off. I know you have that ability, and that's why when we do so much stuff with driving, and then for me, when I went to try and write it out in a book, you realize there's a lot of gaps in the stuff you say to everybody, but the book makes you connect it all. And so I realized, like, once I was really serious about completing the book, I realized there were all these gaps in the theory and the methodology. Like, we have to think all this through. It has to be connected. It has to make sense. It can't be separate chapters. It has to, as we describe, it has to flow. There has to be a flow through it all, without something that, suddenly you go, wait a minute, how'd we get here? I'm not sure. We seem to have jumped ahead, and that's what maybe I'm proudest of with the book, was it forced me to complete it, to have a complete system of driving, where if someone comes at me or you from any direction about driver theory, we're like, I have an answer for that. You can't stump me, because I understand it from the contact patch to the neurons firing in the driver's head. Like, I know how this works, and there's no gaps in between there. And I think that's what makes it effective. And a lot of that, as I was giving you credit for helping me so much with the book, a lot of that has to do with those conversations we had, and they were super fun, weren't they? We'd sit there in my guest room in your house, and we'd sit there for hours, right? And I'd be like, well,
Yeah.
what about this? And you'd be like, no, you are wrong. That's usually the answer I get from you. You're miles off. What are you doing? And eventually we
Not
would,
always.
and we would hone it down. But that process was really cool, wasn't it? I think, Nico,
Yeah.
seriously, I will always cherish those conversations because they were very hard conversations, because it forced us to really delve into the minutia of driving from a physics perspective on the car, but also the psychology and the physiology. That's one thing Nico is amazing at, you guys, is his physiology is amazing, because he's like the hardest training guy I know. And so we had to really think about all of it. And we had to, because I'm like, it's going to get published. And not only that, I'm going to send it to, Emanuele Pirro and Alan McNish. And I'm going to send it to people that
Alan
really do
McNeish,
know
yeah.
this, that really do understand this stuff on a very, very high level. Chris Baker at Michelin, they're going to see this book. They're the first people I sent it to after you and I kind of had a read through once it was done. And so I didn't want to be embarrassed and have, they're like, what are you talking about? And to sort of to our credit, when I did send it to those guys, I never got a note from any of them. The only thing I ever heard was, I learned stuff, which I thought was like,
Huh? Yeah.
unbelievable, considering you're talking about multi-time Le Mans winners and so on and so forth. So that was really, really cool. And, I just recently, I'll have him on as a guest, but Johannes van Overbeek, who's a super guy, and I work with him with Michelin at the IMSA events. And Johannes is a very accomplished driver. I don't know how well you know him, Nico, but he's very technical. And he's got a super logical technical approach to his driving. He has multiple championships in IMSA and DP cars, all of that. So and he just read it not that long ago, and he said the same thing to me. He goes, I learned a lot reading that book. I'd never been able to articulate that stuff that you articulate. So not that I'm trying to pat us on the back too much, but I'm trying to just say in my 20-minute intro of you, that you had a lot to do with how accurate maybe is a good way, and how complete. I'm super proud to say that Optimum Drive is, where I think it is the whole thing in a book in 200 pages. And so that was, a lot of that was to do with you. But what I would love to do, and let you talk a little bit. You're like, am I just like supposed to just sit here for the whole time, or am I going to get to talk? But I would love to, as I've done with my previous
It's
guests,
okay.
because yeah, exactly. Had an audience of one. But to have you kind of run through your background, like like your earliest thoughts of racing and how you got interested in driving fast, and I know, like, we skied together a lot, so, and we've mountain biked together a lot, so I know you like to do a lot of different sports, all this sort of similar stuff I like to do, as far as things that are kind of good cross training for driving a car. We love that stuff. So yeah, how did it all start for you? And then yeah, just take it away, and this should be good.
So I think that one of the biggest points that you just hit is the fact that very accomplished drivers, because they were on their talent and everything, never actually had to look into why they were doing what they were doing for. Whereas because I didn't grow up in a family that was into motorsport, I didn't get an experience into racing until I was in my late teens. The drive and the will to do racing, I honestly don't know where it came from. My mom, says that I I was 2 years old when my parents went to Le Mans. My dad got an invitation to go work as a flag man, volunteer at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and they took me there. I don't remember a thing. I was two, but that is the only thing that, in retrospect, could have stemmed that interest into motor racing. That was from as far as I can remember. 5 years old. We moved from France to Brazil. I was 6. But I remember in France, people asking me what I want to do as an adult, as a man, and I didn't want to be like my father, a chemical engineer, or like the firefighters, or like whatever Superman that you have, which is regular to points to kids. I wanted to be a racing driver, and my parents looked at like, what the hell are we going to do with this kid, and where does that come from? So and it only was much later. And actually, in our previous conversation, we were talking about the few motorsports events that were televised in that time. And yeah, I was in Sao Paulo. I remember this day vividly, black and white TV, black and white TV. We're in Sao Paulo in the apartments, and on TV is the Monaco Grand Prix. And I'm like, this is what I want to do, And I was then about 11, maybe 9. I'm not sure. Something around there. And then from there on, we started following Formula One with my dad, which didn't know and it wasn't into much racing, but had a mild interest of motorsports. And then we went through there, and I followed, and I started looking and finding books and stuff, and started doing 24-hour races with my bicycle in the streets, where I would have a course, and I'm going to go around this pole and that pole, and literally force my young brother, who you have met, Paul, and to do 24-hour races. And we're like, it's midnight, it's your stint, you need to go ride your bike. So these kind of things.
That's pretty funny.
And when I did start racing, which I started both Formula 4s and go-karts at the same time in Brazil, things came somewhat naturally, some didn't. Very little structured information was still set and done. I mean, racing schools were very basic, and we did all this. But then, very rapidly, like most of the young drivers, you start into some degree of coaching. And where a lot of coaches, for the lack of a better word, do a mediocre job just focusing on lines and the very basics, which is fine for the very beginner. But if you want to do a good job, if you really want to help people, you need to understand what they're doing, which forces you. I was like looking, I was 18, not 20, and I was coaching people that were my dad's age. And I'm telling them, no, you know me. Like, no, you're wrong. But I can't just do so. I need to substantiate it. I need to explain to them why they're wrong, because it's very obvious to me, but clearly it is not to them. So why is it obvious to me? What do they do? What do I do? Why does he do that? Why do I do that? And that is what started the whole process of understanding, which is a very fun challenge. And of course, then adaptation. And I know, I work with you a lot, Paul, too, and that's why we're good friends, but really trying to understand the way that person works. And every driver, every person is different, whether you're trying to coach them to become a better skier, a better mountain biker, let alone a better racer. But most of them are not ready to hear it. They are not ready to actually do it, because we are looking at that step there, and there is all these steps that are yet to be taken. And sometimes you have to cut the losses, which that's the part I'm not good at. I try to jump straight up to the top and forget the basics. This is what you need to do.
Yeah.
What do you mean you can't do it? Like, just do it, And then, but yeah, that's for sure the big mental aspect. Of course, the fear of the speed, the fear of the crash, the financial fear, the financial limitation, the fitness limitation. All of this applies, and unless you try to look at all together, you can't ever grasp some people. And fortunate enough to have worked with some of the guys. I mean, in the back over here, I think I have a picture with Pietro Fittipaldi, who of course now is the superstar, as well as the one that is coming up now, Nolan Siegel, Alexander Rossi. When I was the Formula BMW coach, I worked with Alexander Rossi pretty closely. Race against guys like Ryan Hunter-Reay, and at a level that in a similar way, if you really want to be the best, you need to know each one of the persons you race with. and understand the way they do, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And we often talk about the driving side, particularly you and I, but not always talk about the competitive side,
The
which is
racetrack
very
side.
natural to the two of us. But on that long season, it's not about being the fastest every weekend. It's about being the best overall. And I always say that it's like there are good drivers, there are fast drivers, there are winners, and there are champions.
Yeah.
And it takes a different approach, a different mindset, and you can go all the way to, very popular, well, not as popular as I would like it to be, but Rush, the movie Rush,
Mm-hmm.
the rivalry between James Hunt and Niki Lauda. Niki Lauda was definitely one of my heroes growing up, where a lot of people, we have a mutual friend, Paul Charsley, who was always James Hunt. I
Yes.
actually went to see the movie. I went to see the movie on the review with with Paul and his wife, and my ex-wife at the time, and we're both watching the movie. And I know he's in love with James Hunt, and I'm in love with Niki Lauda, and we
Throwing
same
elbows in
thing.
the theater.
Yeah, yeah, but it's the bravado against the methodical approach, and the one who is
Yes.
the champion, and the one who, well, not anymore, but who kept alive for much longer, is Niki Lauda.
Yeah.
Flamboyant one, etc., etc., and that's true for everything.
Yeah,
But
it's definitely an interesting puzzle
yeah,
because
it's
drivers are, like you said, they're individuals, and you kind of assume they're in the same car the last guy was. He came up the same way the last guy did. He should probably think like the last guy did. But the first thing you learn in this business is the one thing you do know is he doesn't. Like it's going to be different, and
yeah.
and it's vastly different. And because so much of it, we're not robots, we're emotional beings, and they all come with some sort of baggage one way or another. Sometimes it can be, they've got trauma in their past, or they could be over enthusiastic and too optimistic about their driving. It can range, like, it can be all over the map. And it's always our job to make them realistic and get them to kind of calm down, and let's look at the next steps in reality, not what you think, but this is where you need to go and how you need to get there. And it's a tough process. And I always described it, it's almost like a doctor-patient relationship, where you have to have this level of trust with them that they're willing to tell you things that they don't really tell other people. It needs to be
Sure.
it needs to be that intimate, because why they're not doing it. You can see that they're a little scared here or
Yeah.
apprehensive there, but they don't want to admit things like that. And so it's up to us to kind of find a gentle way to bring those things up, because you're not going to make progress until they're dealt with, till they're addressed. So tell me
No,
where.
no, no, no gentle need.
I
No,
know,
no
I know.
gentle.
So you want to know the difference between Nico and I? He's a killer in the car and out of the car. I'm a killer in the car.
Yeah.
Oh man. And so where were you coaching when you were 17, 18? You didn't talk about that. When did you first get in a car, and how did you end up coaching?
So I started. Well, the first thing that I did is, I went to, after I finished high school in Brazil. Again, my parents don't come from a wealthy background nor a motorsport connected background. So I basically went to Interlagos. I was living in Sao Paulo. I had been there several times. Actually, several times I went and I literally rode my bicycle from where I lived down to Interlagos to look at, the karting track, to the stuff. Yeah, yeah. You've been there. We've been
I
on the roads
know.
together there.
It's sort of
And
like
like,
when we're
yeah, I rode
we
my
sort of
bicycle on
met.
the street.
Yeah.
Hey, I was going to school on my bicycle, after
Yeah.
my parents divorced and my dad went back to France. Money was difficult. We couldn't get even the school bus to go. The school was taken care of by my dad's company, but so I, instead of taking the regular bus, I rode my bicycle
How far was it?
and
Because
on the run,
Interlagos is a
which drove
very
my
big
mom
city.
crazy.
How far away were you from Interlagos, your house?
Um, uh, 15 miles, 20 miles, one way.
That's a long way. Yeah. If you've got to see like Sao Paulo to appreciate like
Yeah.
15, 20 miles of that I'm not gonna. I mean, it's crazy. Like you're taking your life into your own hands doing it. I imagine it was kinder and calmer back then. Now you hear
No,
about.
not really.
Not
Not
really.
really.
No.
But that's what I did all the time. But I did it all the time. It's like it's what people say. Well, the violence in Brazil, like when you're there, you get used to it. You pay attention to things in a
Normalize it.
different way. And I'll go to the complete opposite spectrum of that. When I moved to France and I started working at the racing school there, one of the first things that happened is that my very good friends now too, Christophe, took me with his sister. They took me to lunch in Saint Paul sur Ternoise. This is in Arras in Ternoise. Crime here has gotten so out of hand and everything. And I'm looking around, how? There is nobody here. No, I'm just coming from Sao Paulo. And we
Yeah,
get to the
exactly.
restaurant and we get out of the car and they leave the car and the keys in the ignition. And I'm like, you're gonna leave the car? Oh yeah, it's fine. I'm like, what happened to that? No,
It's a crime
it's
wave.
all where you are and how you adapt.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
it's all different. So anyway, I did that. By the way, the first time I ever went to Interlagos to go see anything, and I saw the karting race, and there was this junior, well, actually cadet or whatever it was called at the time, karting race, and who was the winner of that race? Helio Castroneves.
Ah,
The very first time I ever went to a karting race, it was there. Tony Kanaan was racing. I've met Tony several times since. We're not friends, but we have crossed paths so many times. We connect each other and we have mutual respect. Helio Castroneves is much more distant, but that first day there, I go and they were maybe 11 and I was 13. Which today somehow the gap of age is much bigger, but that's at a time we were about 2 years apart. And then, so the first thing I
time
did,
zone.
I went back to my bike.
Hmm.
Yeah, the time zone, exactly. I went to the track and I tried to find a job. Ended up doing, working with one of the karting shops as the gopher. Let's go around and then trade for seat time, as well as there was this little racing school called Formula Alpi from Aldo Piedadi, who was the founder of it, and it was basically ancient Formula Ford cars. And the same thing, I said I'll do anything if you give me an opportunity into there, and I traded with seat types. In the meantime, I was, because of my French background, I was very fortunate enough that one of the connections from my school, their parents worked at Novotel and Ticket Restaurant, and they helped me, two French companies, and they helped me by giving me a little bit of funding to start racing in Brazil and both karting and Formula Fords. And I did just about a season and had a very, very, very bad crash, and which wasn't really my fault, although I'm the one driving, so I'm always responsible. But this was hydroplaning in the pit straight away and a non-wing car, which, yeah, the decision should have been not to go out. It was too much rain. And we actually stopped. I remember stopping and the other drivers in the same team environment saying, no, it's like, are you going to go out again? So yes, I want the experience to drive in the rain, but I want it to be wet, as opposed to at that point, it was both wet and dry. You never knew what you were coming up
Yeah.
to. It was just too sketchy. Once the rain came down, I said, let's go out. And I remember putting on the seatbelt on, being helped to put the seatbelt on. I don't remember turning on the car and leaving. And my crash was on the fourth lap. And basically, I don't remember any of that. Never did. And the car just hydroplaned very quickly, did two spins, and went straight into the pit wall, literally like this,
Yeah.
split into half. This is before the changes were made to the pit wall. We have seen many F1 crashes at Interlagos because of this exact same phenomena. And I was one more of those victims, except I was not in a carbon fiber tub like Mark Webber was when his very spectacular crash. So I didn't walk away. I was 3 weeks in a hospital, 4 months in a wheelchair. And that is another reason as to why I immediately started researching and learning more about safety, how the cars are built, how the tracks are built, how the tire zones needs to be, which kind of runoff area is the more efficient for touring cars, for open wheel cars,
Yeah.
all these kind of stuff that I could understand and make my own decisions, because clearly the decisions that were made there were not good enough. I ended up 3 weeks in a hospital. I have scars on my under thigh. That is because the wood, which was the only piece that protected the box, was a piece of wood, a big piece of wood, because there was an electrical outlet on it, so that they could have access to power. Well, wood, when you break it, doesn't break very cleanly, so it make big shards, which
Yeah.
basically scuffed this deep into my thigh. My femur was dislocated, my shoulder was dismantled, because the seatbelts tore. The seatbelts tore under the impact. Well, we know very well that if you have any kind of crash, the seatbelts need to be replaced, because they're stretched, and if they're not, they will tear. That's what happened. In retrospect, I may have saved my life, because that pushed my torso out, and the wall literally crushed the seat. But so all of that made me decide and commit to immediately go to Europe and search for scholarship programs. I know we have discussed, back then the most famous scholarship program was the Elf Winfield one. And I went and I did their parallel one, which was called Privilege Formula, which was a new Laurent Aiello was the guy who won just before me. Actually, he's 2 years ahead of me. Damien Vanderpoel, Eric Vanderpoel's brother, won the year ahead of me. And I went there and I finished second in that scholarship on the final. I turned the fastest lap. No, sorry, I turned the fastest average of 4 laps, but one driver did 1 lap faster in the final. What they didn't know is that in between the semifinal and the final, which was 2 months apart, I went back to Brazil and I had surgery on my arm, because I had a plate in my arm because of the crash.
Wow.
That had to be redone, that had to be removed. So, and of course, I didn't say that because we were supposed to have very low experience, which I did. I had very low experience, but Emmanuel Collard was in it too, and he was, I'd seen him testing at Formula Renault for days and days and days.
He was at mine as well, and he did the same thing. He's the one that ended up winning my year completely. And I had the fastest lap, and I had the fastest average, and they gave it to him anyway. So
yeah,
very similar.
That was Winfield. So
that was Winfield,
yeah. So what they didn't know is that I was shifting barely with one hand. I was only using my right hand to shift. I couldn't really hold the pressure on the steering wheel well enough. So did a good job with that. That being said, they still ended up helping me a lot, Privilege Formula and all that, and gave me a job as an instructor there, which is when I started to get all of these. That was your original question. When did you actually start coaching and do this? That is when I started interacting with people directly in the cars. Even in Brazil, during my recovery, I actually helped and wrote down the curriculum to the school that I was working with. They had a very loose way, and I'm like, there is a better way. There must be a better way to do all this. And I was helping them translate and read down from some of the stuff that I had read and articulate things better. And so
that's cool.
That was that. Already trying to work the analyses. Yeah. Even though
I didn't know that. I didn't know that about you, that you were kind of writing curriculums or helping them write curriculums, back in Brazil. That's pretty neat. That's a cool.
And Tony Kanan went through that school. I was his instructor at that point when he needed to, because you turn 18, you had to go into car racing. You needed to get a driving license for it, although he had been racing go-karts for 10 years. So I taught him how to do heel toe.
Oh, there you go.
Claim that.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then went to Europe, and from there on, I was living in the back seat of my car and moving back and forth, and doing things. Things are different nowadays.
Things are very different. Yeah, but I love your story, because I mean, you definitely, you went to Privilege Formula. You were not a privileged driver.
No.
No. A bit of an irony in that name, because like you said, you were sleeping in your car going to races, right? And that was part of what you did. And Uh, you
Yeah,
could get
and
away with that.
eating, yeah, I was eating cereal in the morning with powdered milk and water. That was my breakfast, and going over there. Yeah. So soon enough, I made enough friends and girlfriends in different places. We lived in a different way back then. But I was very blessed. And then Christophe, who was the manager of the school in Norécole, took me under his wing and basically gave me a room at his place. And then from there on, I was there working at the school. I ran their series, won the championship against the guy who had won the scholarship, but they still helped me to go get some funding to do their series. Ran the F3 championship as well against Stefan Ortelli.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I met him and I became acquaintance and came from there. And then still I had nothing. So here I go looking for another similar opportunity. And boop, I'm driving to the UK and I'm doing a similar type of scholarship shootout with this school team called First Time Racing. And same thing, I'm sleeping in my car. I win the final. Um, and they asked me, "Where did you stay last night?" I'm like, in my car. Like, what? Like, yeah. So it took me out. It was there. That's what led me to race the Formula First Championship at the Brands Hatch, all 5 races in the Winter Series, and then the British Formula Ford in 91, 92, 93. Sorry, 92, 93, and then back. Yeah. So that's where we go. And then same, that's how I ended up in the States too, with all of this. And then I went to the touring cars in the Citroen AX Cup, won the championship, both the French and European championship, with aid from a privateer um, mechanic apprentice shop, where 3 weeks they were in the dealership, 3 weeks they were at the school. When they were at the school, we got together and we went racing. So these kids were never, in a similar way to me, these kids had never left the small region of France. And now I was taking them to Spa, to Zandvoort, to Estoril. And they were like, this is seeing the world. I wasn't paying them. They were working on the car, but we all got our hands together and the prize money. And that's why I went that route. Because there was Citroen in the background, the prize money was good enough that if you did well, you would more than fund the program.
Right.
And if you did really well, which ended up winning the championship, both French and European, you actually made a substantial bonus money. And that's how I came to the States, following in the footsteps of other scholarships, and ended up at Skip Barber, which won the big scholarship. Not the first year, the second year was rookie of the year. That's where we met at the time, while working with all this. Back the original Skip Barber with Skip,
Yep.
who is still, for me, a big blessing, all of this. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
really, I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, you look back at that and you could have had a a funded family kind of thing where your parents had money and you would have had a much easier go with all this. You probably would have gone to England and gone straight into Formula Ford, won the festival, gone into F3, had success there because they would have put you right in a good team and you would have just kind of marched along. And that's the I think the amazing thing about your story is this. I mean, we were talking in the beginning, you're like, I don't know when I started liking driving,
But actually, that's exactly why, you were saying before, makes me, but not just me, other guys like you, like others, that's why when we go to an Alan McNish or to a Johannes von Overbeek or somebody that is accomplished, they didn't have the exact same level of struggle at the beginning. And although they are more accomplished, that's why they still learn from us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's what made us different. And yeah, I agree with you. I could have had a much easier path, maybe
Yeah.
even have made it to Formula One or IndyCars. Would I be a better driver? I don't know. Would I be a better person? I don't know either. Would I
It's hard
change
to
a
say.
thing?
It's hard to say.
Maybe.
Yeah. More trophies, but maybe not a better
Yeah.
driver. That's an interesting thing to think about because I think we base so much of what we do on our successes, obviously, our very public successes of winning races. and championships and all that. And you've done your fair share of that. I mean, there's a lot of championships in your past along the way. And that was the enabler, like you said, with the prize money that was given. That's how you funded next year and how you ate that year, and all of those types of things, and kept your mechanics being mechanics. And I mean, to me, that's the story. Like, that's a motorsport story that's worthy of and you look at Paul Charsley's favorite, James Hunt. He really struggled because he didn't have money. And again, the personalities are very different between you and James, but he was kind of in the same boat, where he didn't have money till he was well into Formula One. There was no money there. I love those stories. I think, everyone loves an underdog story, but I think, to kind of solidify it a little bit, the thing I always think about is it's the last corner of a race that you want to win. And you're both equal speed as drivers, but one of you's had the more privileged upbringing through racing, and the other has been like you. They've been sleeping in the damn car, and they need this prize money. And my money's always going to go on you to win that race, because you just damn well need it more. It's not necessarily you want it more, you need it. Like it's and so there's something we know you and I, from doing this for so long, that probably the greatest gift that a person could have to succeed is just determination, like not letting anything get in their way. It comes up every single time I have a driver on this podcast, an engineer on this podcast. That's like the key differentiator. It's not this magical natural talent that people want to talk about. It's simply they will refuse to give up. They just refuse. And you hear that all the time. It gets all touchy-feely, you use the Rocky analogies. Perry McCarthy did that. He used that analogy. It's not about, whether you get knocked down or not. It's how often you're willing to get up. It's like that kind of stuff. And it sounds kind of corny because it's the subplot of like every sports movie ever made. But to me, it is the difference. Like, it's the differentiator that makes you the kind of, you don't take any crap from anybody because of that, because you're confident in your abilities, in your methodologies, and your process, your approach, all those things. You have been through all these levels where you had to make success. You had to manifest success. It wasn't handed to you because you were in the best team on the best car. You had to earn that all the way. And you learn to coach, you learn to engineer cars, to set them up. You're learning safety because you had a bad crash. By the way, I'll go ahead and mention it since it's on the tip of my tongue. So that was kind of like when I first knew you, was when we did that trip to Interlagos, and you were kind of there as the translator and all that stuff. And we're getting a tour of the facility. And for myself and for Chip Pankow, who was the guy that was with us, we were kind of like our little team, doing all this special project stuff for Skip Barber at the time. And they're giving us a tour of the facility. And so they take us to the medical facility. And I didn't know about Nico's crash. Like, it's not something you talk about, right?
We had just met too.
We had just met. So we go in there, and there's the doctor there, who's like the trauma doctor that's on staff at the hospital. And he sees Nico, and you see him just light up. He's like, "Oh, Nico." And like, we had seen the president of the track, we had seen the manager, we'd seen all those people. And they're like, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you, Mr. Ronde." We go to the guy, the doctor, and he's like, "Why does the doctor know you so well, Nico?" And he's like, "Well, that pit lane redesign that they did?" We're like, "Oh yeah, they lengthened it because it was too short and people were spinning." Because Interlagos has this awesome, it's actually really cool. It has this big climbing left-hander where you're just flat out. And then this big climbing flat out left-hander finally gets level and then kind of at the pits, and then it just goes straight down to now what they call the center S's. And so that pit lane had, he said, like Mark Webber, there have been a ton of crashes there, but that was almost my introduction to Nico, was like, "How does this doctor know you?" And you're like, "Let me go show you." And so we went over and we looked at the pit lane, and you're like, it used to be back here, and now it's here, and you're welcome. And so that I thought that was funny because you have this very, it's not shy, but you don't, you're kind of there, and you're sort of always smiling along, and you're going along with these situations, and so you're just like, oh, I've been found out. The doctor ratted me out. Now I've got to tell him about my crash that I had here. But I think that's cool, and as I was saying a moment ago, that's all that stuff built into this approach that you had and made you, I guess the right word would be the complete driver you are. When you kind of sum it all up together. And like you were saying, where when you're coaching, how, you need to understand everything. And, I talk about that a lot. Again, I bring it up, the first word in my book is holistic, which, the meaning of that word is that you'll never understand something completely until you understand every single constituent part that makes it up. And that's what makes holistic everything really cool, is because they don't just, in medicine, give you a drug for one thing. They treat you for not that one thing, but also all the interactions that will have with the rest of your physiology, how it'll affect you as a person. So they're much more holistic in their approach. That's where holistic medicine gets its name from, where they're focused on everything is like a complete approach to healing. And that's a great way to approach driving. And I don't think you get that same approach. You don't have that dogged determination that I know you have, as knowing you so long, whether we're climbing on a bike and you're just killing me as you do, or we're swimming or skiing or whatever it is, we're going. And that's you, like you're like that. It's something I've always really, really admired you for that. And again, I don't know how intentional it is. Some of it is because, like you said, some people I think would have a crash and they would just say bad luck and they would move on, where you went and checked on the seat belts, you went and looked at the barrier, you looked at the design of the car, and you did all that. That's not necessarily typical. I would say that's a good sort of little insight into how you think, where basically in your head, you hate not knowing things. I know this about you. And so, or hate being wrong about something. And so you'll go figure it out. Like you're very determined at that point to find a solution. Because I know in your head, it makes sense. Like you're like, I can't let that crash happen again. I was basically lucky. If, like you said, if the seatbelt hadn't failed, I might have not been, where I was, and I would have been in a lot worse shape, whether you'd even be here today, to have this conversation we're having. So I love all of that, Nico. I think that's really cool. And I guess it's like always, it was like I was talking to, when I was talking last week to Peter, he was talking about the influences on him as like people that helped you along the way. And you've mentioned names along the way. That's the other part, is I think when people like that, people of influence, people who can move the needle for you, they can put you in a car or point you in the right direction or whatever it is. They have to see that in you, what I've just been describing, right? Like they get pinged by people all the time. There are people always going, hey, I'm the fastest guy in the world. You should put me in your race car. Perry had a funny line that he did where he's like, I don't know how your company's going to survive in 3 years unless you put me in a race car this year. It's like, I think you guys will be bankrupt and out of business, But it's like he has this real larger than life personality where that would somehow sound funny. If you said it, they would just throw you out the door. But the thing that people see in you, whether you kind of realize it or not, is this professionalism. And I think you've had it, as you're describing the coaching you were doing very early on, whether it was at the kart track, whether it was recovering from your crash and you're in a wheelchair for 4 months, all of that. It's like you're very holistic how you think of driving. You think of the whole thing. You try and think of the whole package. And because we all know that anything that you don't consider will bite you in the ass at some point. You've got to think about all of it. If you don't, it's a weakness, right? And that's the last thing any of us want to have. So I think your story, and it is a struggle. I can say your struggle of just staying current and racing and trying to maintain momentum, right? And build momentum. And I love that. I mean, So 3 different competitions you've gone to, right? Where you did the one in France, you did the one in the UK, and then you did Skip Barber, the big
Those
scholarship
are those,
over in the US.
those are the ones I won. Those are the ones I
That's
won.
the ones that count.
I I also did a Oracle one, which I was cut out in the final despite breaking their record, but for political reasons.
Of course. I
And
mean,
I did one,
that's
and I
part
did
of
one
racing.
which was rallying actually, which was
Cool.
by the French government, and I was among the fastest, but this was my mistake. I clipped the cone where it wasn't supposed to be in the final and was thrown out. But I was on par to be the fastest and getting the scholarship to go rallying. And that could have been a pivotal moment
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
driving is driving. And, I always say today that my focus was always towards road racing and etc. One element was actually the safety element. The other element was the speed, because it's much easier to make it Spa, a 5 mile track, safe than it is 200 kilometers of specials. So I always felt that rallying was a lot more dangerous than road racing, and that's one of the reasons why I made that decision. That being said, had the opportunity presented itself in a different way, I would have taken that chance and going rallying, and I think that actually I would have done really well because I am always among the fastest to adapt to whatever conditions there are and reading the terrain, etc., etc. So, but it is what it was anyway. So that those are the competitions that I won, not all the ones that I entered. Because I entered more because that's part of challenging yourself and reproving things. And I don't know, and you go down if necessary if there is an opportunity that presents itself. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I think that's a good lesson for aspiring drivers that might be watching this or listening to this, that doing those competitions, it does create very unique opportunities. And yeah, there are no guarantees. Even if you're the fastest person, there's no guarantee. But if the planets align a little bit for you and they see you as someone that is good for their championship, or good for their image of their company or marketing their brand, that they you'll win the thing if you're quick enough, and that can be this massive springboard. It is it is the way that people with no money have sustained racing for a long time. The point of it all, though, you
Yeah.
got to have results. Like, that's the end of the day. You have to be able to turn the lap. You have to be able to show that consistency and that professionalism. They want to see the start, at least, of a complete driver, someone with the right mindset that again, would represent their brand really well. But that's really cool that you went to that many. I mean, and I think it's really cool. What made you like the rally one? Was it just sort of the only one that was on the radar because that was a big? I, you did. I've
Um,
mentioned it before the podcast, but you did some sliding around in Brazil, like in an old Jeep, didn't you?
oh, I started. Yeah, but there was no competition there. I mean, I
No,
started
no,
driving. I
that was
was
just
10,
driving. Yeah.
but that was just driving. Of course, no driving license, etc. But my dad was a chemical engineer who ended up taking a management position in a big chemical plant in Brazil. So he lived basically on the farm. There was a chemical plant in one area and the residency of the few managers, which is where we lived. But
Yeah.
they were also growing rice. They were growing other crops because a lot of the employees of the factory lived in that little town close by, which would have never afforded to, but now they had a much better housing. So anyway, so yeah, that's where I learned how to drive in a Jeep Willys of 1976 that my dad had restored, and so just for fun, non-synchronized gearbox. So I had to learn how to heel toe right away, So and I literally could not move the shift lever; it was too stiff. So I had to use both hands to shift. So I
Wow.
had to let go of the steering wheel, shift, and then go because I was 11 and non-adjustable seats, so a cushion behind me to reach the pedals. That's how I learned how to drive. And to the surprise of my parents, it just all made sense to me. My dad's like, yeah, do this, do that. And I did. Where my older brother, who's 4 years older than me, managed to do it, but not as quickly.
Right.
And then go on. And they were like, what there? And then I was shifting no clutch, downshift, upshift, no clutch on a non like this. And my dad was, how are you doing that? It's like, I don't know.
Makes
It's
sense. This makes
just the
sense now.
timing, and just this. Yeah, it just feels good, feels right. It's
Yeah.
like, no, don't do that. You're gonna damage your car. Like, okay, it doesn't feel like I am, but that's all right.
Yeah.
So, and then quickly, we were a few years later. We would tell my parents. At this point, my parents had trusted both my older brother and I, um, to drive on our own. So we would go and play around, and we would tell them we're going to do this loop. And then what we did is that we would get out of town so that we couldn't hear the car anymore, and we would time ourselves. And I would drive this way, and then he would drive this way, and then we'll see. So that is when we started sliding around and moving things, but nothing, just getting the feel of the car and know these things. And yeah, that's what I did. But is that where I got the feel? I don't know. It seemed like I already had it because it came almost immediately. The second I understood how the car worked, it just came,
Okay. So what's your
which is
process
all.
there? Do you consider yourself to be a really good visualizer? Did you just when you're given instruction for something, do you picture yourself doing it? Is that how your
Sure,
mind works?
but beyond me doing it, what do I do that makes what? Just like when I described the shifting. I mean, back when we had the F3 school, and I was like, well, what's happening in your gearbox when you're on the throttle? The engine is putting the torque together, and you visualize those gears bounding together. You preload the shift lever, and when you lift off the gas at the timing, those gears don't just lift off;
Yeah.
they bounce off each other.
Mhm.
That is when you take one gear out and put the other in. If your timing is off, it's going to shift, but not as smoothly.
Yeah.
This is how I work in every way. When you get the load transfer, if you have anti-dive, which is a concept that we are in an era where it's very different, where you have all these GT drivers that try to jump into a prototype thinking that it's just like a faster GT car. And there is a huge difference because it's a lot more like a Formula car. And
Yeah.
I say that because I just thought of the anti-dive. Anti-dive is one of the things that the air arms are not level, are in the right position. So
Mhm.
the load transfer happens to the tires much, much, much faster than it happens with any type of suspension. So anyway, I visualize all that when I
Yeah.
describe it, and I feel all that. So yes, if I get an explanation, not only do I visualize myself doing it, but I visualize myself doing it and the trickle down, all the
Components
way down.
all the
It's the
way
same way
through.
when I the same way if we're talking about shifting on a bicycle, mountain biking, where you don't shift under load. It's the same way. All these, um, I have a very natural engineering view of things, although I don't have any formal engineering background,
Mhm.
as we have discussed before. So,
You
but
think you got that from your dad? Was
visualization,
that,
yes.
was that from your dad, do you think, the engineering mindset?
I, I would have to assume so. So, I mean, he's a chemical engineer, even if we're not very close, he's a chemical engineer. But my mom was also a teacher,
Oh, that
in
helps
a different
too.
way.
That
And
helps too.
both my grandparents, yeah, my grandfather was a mathematics teacher, and
Okay.
my grandmother was also a teacher.
See, that's
Not
really,
very close to any of them, but
yeah.
still,
That's still important, I think, because obviously your mom is a teacher, your dad is an engineer. That's a pretty sweet combo if
yeah.
you think about it. Like, because I imagine that she would make sure, and again, I'm just sort of presuming this, but she would make sure he explained things well, and not just being, you know how we can be, where we're just going to explain things to make ourselves feel smart, or you can actually give it to people in a way that they can digest it and understand it. And that takes a lot more thought and understanding, because we can operate up here, but they can only understand down here. You know, it's a big part of
Yes.
coaching, isn't it? We see people that are wickedly fast in race cars that really have a hard time articulating why they're
Oh,
fast.
for sure.
And
Yeah.
then that's a majority of very fast
And
racers.
sometimes the other way around. Sometimes the
That's
other way
true
around. You
too.
have
Yeah,
guys who are
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
you talk to them, it's like this guy should be great. And you get in the car, it's like, what the hell happened? It's like, why?
I agree. That's a really funny one too. I've had that happen where I have been so impressed with my like
Mhm.
introduction to this person and how articulate they are. I'm like, they're good, and then you're like, what haven't I heard of them? And you're like, they're gonna fly. Like they've got to be just a rocket in the car. And they're just like, and you're just you're right. It can go either way. But
Which extends to, we have both worked with a lot of different manufacturers, and
yeah,
the engineers come out with
they're
brilliant
the same
ideas
way.
and like, look, and like, it
Yeah,
doesn't do that. Oh no, it does. Like, let me show you. It doesn't do that. We
yeah.
have both done that, and oh, it's not supposed to do that. Like, yeah,
Yeah, in my car reviewing that I do for the fast lane, I get to go talk to those. I go drive the car. I talk to the engineers, and man, that conversation in that car, there's a lot of like, well, that explains everything going on. Like you just like that explain, and then you get to like a really switched on group that, and they usually give like a presentation the night before, and then you go drive the car the next day. So they're like an evening presentation, and then you get in the car the next day. So you're listening to them and you're trying to figure out, like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, these guys know what they're talking about or not? Or is this just a bunch of lip service? They're
yeah.
trying to sound like,
What am I getting into here?
yeah, yeah. And so that's part of it for me. I'm just sitting there listening, and and we have these little key things that if a guy can put this piece of technology in the car and he can say this little bit about how it affects the driving and driver confidence, you're like, okay, so that's pretty good. Like he's connect, and then your other one's going, oh, it makes it faster and it's awesome and everyone loves it, and you're like, okay, and you go drive the car the next day, and the guys that aren't connecting things, articulating how the why behind what they did, not just what they did, but why. And we learned this from our winning GTLM program or whatever. You're like, oh, okay. So it's so funny, and you can almost predict how the car is going to drive the next day by how switched on those engineers are. So um, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's actually, like I said, it's sort of a little game I play whenever I go review these cars. I can almost see like how the car is going to be depending on how well they can articulate the vehicle dynamic stuff that they're so proud of that they put into this car versus the last car. So it's always fun. So yeah, and I think to bring it back again, you're just very much the Nicky Lauda of the James Hunter, Nicky Lauda side of the mental equation, and you can see that with sort of how you were brought up. And it's the same way, because I don't think we take all that stuff for granted, because you're just like, isn't every family like that? You're kind of like that. It's like that's my parents. They're just parents like every other parent, but they can be quite different. And then that, whether we want to admit it or not, has a big influence on who we are throughout our lives in that moment.
Some of that has got to be genetic.
Definitely some of it is genetic, but look at your brother, right? Like you picked it up
Yeah.
right away and your brother didn't, and the genetics pretty similar between you and your brother, and just
Oh yeah,
different
yeah. But my
different
point is that my
mindset.
parents weren't around, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't want to get into any of that. The mailman
So,
came over that day. I get it. I get it. Special
yeah,
delivery.
it's complicated. It's
Yeah.
complicated
but
sometimes.
but all those things are cool, and I think the thing about it, I think with you, and it's kind of like this. It's the same way with me, though. I'm different than you, and not necessarily in a good way, but we're different. We're alike in a lot of things, but we also have our differences. And again, these are a lot of these things that I feel I'm missing.
Sure.
You have, and you just have this crazy level, like I was saying, it's this determination, but you're very matter of fact about it. Like you're just like you were describing it already. You were describing driving here, and they're down here, and you're like, why don't you get it? Because things just, that's your mindset, where you make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's every step of the way, you don't make assumptions about knowledge. You make sure you learn. You make sure that it makes sense in your head. You're taking this piece of the puzzle, you put it in there, and you've assimilated it, and it's now part of your process. It's not like this separate piece of information. You're really good at that. And if I'm gonna say super nice things about you, that's the thing to me. So like going out and riding your bike for 8 hours to you is not like crazy. You're like, of course I would, because it's part of what I have to do to maintain this level of fitness that I want. Because I have a triathlon coming up, I have a race coming up, I have a kart race coming up, whatever it happens to be. It just, to you, that's the look you always give me. You're like, why wouldn't you? Like, squirrel brains, is that what you call me? But that's what you'd say.
It's going to get you to perform better. It's
Yeah,
going to
but the
get
thing
you to
is,
do those last 2
everyone
laps
knows it,
better.
Nico. Everyone knows it. Very few people walk the walk. Very few people do it. We do a version of it. We don't do the 100% version of it, right? That's the thing. When you look at our fitness together, you put in twice the time I do, and I could go out and do that, but I'll go off and do other things, or and not have quite the same regimented schedule. I mean, that's the big differentiator. Where if whenever I talk to anybody and they're talking about racing, I don't think about necessarily, I'll be honest with you, I don't often think about my approach that comes to my mind, but it comes to mind, but I often think about you and what you would do in this situation. And that's the advice I'll give to them. Because I know it's the more dedicated version of me. And I'm not afraid to say that. It's the truth. And I'm off having too much fun doing things. You're much more focused, and that's something that I think is incredibly impressive. And again, a great lesson when we talk about racing very often, and you hear these stories, from people back in the day, but everyone's like, I'm super determined to get in that car, and yet they have, I want to go racing, I want to do it as a living, and you ask them like sort of how dedicated they are to that, or you start asking about their lifestyle, and they've got a girlfriend and they've got this hobby and that hobby, and they go do this and they take vacations, and they're racing is
I'll
just,
stop you before I stop you even before all of that.
yeah.
How many professional instructors, coaches do you know that are overweight?
Yeah. Well, including me,
You're not in the most extreme case, and we are both getting a little bit older. But I know a bunch of guys who are in the late 20s, early 30s that are trying to become pro drivers, and they're fat.
yeah. Yeah. And
But what kind of dedication is that? What kind of dedication is that? You cannot have that. And I have some of my dear friends and guys that I'm trying to help that are they go over to Europe, they go do these races here and there and everything. And so it's like, until you look the par, you stand no chance with a European team.
yeah. And it's
You could
effectively
be you
performance
can be the
too.
fastest guy in the world, but if
Yeah.
you don't look the par, they're not even going to consider you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And so that's really the part of this I think that's important for people to understand. It's like, I think it's subjective when you ask someone, how serious are you? And they're like, I'm super serious, but they're basing that answer on all the things they've done in their life. Like, this is the most serious I've ever taken anything. And it's like, well, on the scale of anyone ever attempting something like this, how do you land on that scale? Not this is harder than I've ever tried to do anything. And it's such a competitive sport to be a part of. I mean, it's the everything is stacked so much against you, financially, physically, the number of seats versus the number of people that want to do it. All of those things are factors that, like you said, only the very best are going to be getting into cars. And you might think you gave 100%.
But even now, even if you are the very best, unless you're bringing a budget along, you're not even getting in the car.
That's
It's
part
a
of it.
very sad state of
Well,
affairs.
it is.
It's
It
like
is.
nowadays, it doesn't matter how good you are. It's just like it's all about, can you bring the money to go over there and go play, which is not good.
It's not good, but there are people that are just as gifted out of the car finding money as they are in the car driving, and it
Sure,
shouldn't be
sure.
that way. But you like Perry, Perry McCarthy, original Stig, he got into Formula One with no money, like no money, and he did it kind of winning.
Different era.
Yeah,
Different
different
era.
era, but people still
Me
do
too.
it today. If you're willing to shop, sweep a shop floor and trade time, and it can still be done. It's never been easy to get in that car. It's never been easy, and it goes up and down depending on manufacturer involvement in motorsports and so on and so forth. But you meet the right people along the way. I know people that have had a company that's backed them that was not their family's company, and they've had them their whole life because just they met them at the right moment, and they've had this company that's
Perfect.
helped them the whole way through. And so it's not impossible. It's nearly impossible. Is that acceptable?
That's acceptable.
But that is possible. And I was joking with Perry about that. He was up, he'd go, and he was doing the same thing Lewis Hamilton did, where he went up to Ron Dennis and saying, "Hey, I want to drive one of your cars," that kind of stuff. And it's just like pie in the sky, like the millions of dollars that are between saying that to Ron Dennis, the millions and millions, and then the results that have to happen to you actually get to a point where you can do it. And on all of those things have to fall into place. The same time you were racing, and I was racing in France and trying to do stuff in 1990, 89 and 90. So I was like a couple of years before you, and the
Yeah.
economy was horrible. Like I was going to all these meetings.
Yeah.
I was flying back and forth, and I lived in the Washington D.C. area, so I had access to all the embassies of all the countries around the world, and I would go to these meetings, these business meetings in the British embassy, and so I would go there, and it was the British American Business Association I was a part of, and I literally have the president of Cable and Wireless, which at the time was a multi-billion-dollar, running cables across the Atlantic, British American company. I'm trying to find any company that has one foot in it, since I have, I was born in England, and I have a U.S. citizenship. I was trying to find any company, and it was just like crickets. Like I would go in there and I had pitches all written up. I'd be wearing the suit, and I'd go to these functions at the embassy every month to meet these people that were the captains of industry. And because the economy was so depressed at the time, they're all like, "We love you, Paul. Like you're a really entertaining guy. You seem like you have your everything together, and that you'd be a great guy to." They're like, "But not now. Like not now. Like we don't have a nickel to rub together at the moment for promotional stuff. And come see us in a few years." And then and so that was, a lot of guys have that same deal where your timing's wrong. You win the school scholarship, you get to do the season of racing, and then you're out into the real world now on your own money. But there's nothing happening as far as it's a downturn in the economy. Interest rates are high, and everyone's cutting back, not wanting to promote so all of these things are influences that certainly can stop a racer from even the best guy out of the car. And I wasn't that good, by the way. I was trying, but I wasn't that good at it, or I would have had more results. But there's so many variables, is what my point to I'm trying to make here. And I still fervently believe that it can be done with no money. I think it can be done with no money, but you're going to need to hustle out of the car. It can't be done only on results. It can't be done that way.
No.
You have to be just as good out of the car, talking to people, networking, and marketing yourself as you are driving.
And actually, I fully second that. And earlier on, we mentioned Alan McNish. Alan, who became a friend, etc., through our mutual experience with the Jim Russell School, etc., and the future driver. But Alan, I always point him out. We looked at data. We had a fun interaction where
Yeah.
he came over to my data, and he asked me, he's like, "Nico, what happened? why don't I know you? Because after he seen my name, which was very genuine. But the other side of that is I always use Alan as an example because I know that in the car, from a technical standpoint of view, I'm there. But when I watch him outside of the car,
Wow. Yeah.
and even now that I am so much better than I was when I was
Mhm.
18 or 19 years old, I was never near to
No.
what Alan is outside of the car. And
He is
that's the difference.
unbelievable
That
out of the car.
absolutely is difference. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Like you can meet him. I remember,
Professional in
oh my
every way
God.
that he does, in and
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible. And he remembers, like I see him now I see him at Le Mans when I'm going there for Michelin. And so that's where I saw him just this last year or this year, sorry. It's not quite, the year's not quite over yet. For the 100th anniversary. And we were talking, and that's the thing about Alan. Like if you're standing in the pit lane with Alan McNish, which is what I was doing, and I'm there with a whole group of drivers that have won Le Mans. Like there's a circle of 5 or 6 of us standing around. I'm the one idiot in the group that hasn't, I'm the Stig, and Alan standing there, and it's Didier, it's just a whole group of guys that have had great success over in Europe and around the world, and Terry Borcheller and so on and so forth. And Alan, like every single person walking by that was in some sort of team getup, and we're in the pits, so you've got fans in there, but everyone knew Alan, and Alan knew everyone's name. I mean, it's so hard for him to walk from A to B. I remember him remembering my name like out of a tiny little interaction. And the next time I saw him was like, because I think he came over and then he went back and came back again. He remembered everything about me. And I was just like, oh my God, like I am so bad at that. Like that's been a weakness my whole life, is just remembering people's names. It takes me a long time to learn names, and I'm not great with faces either. So I'm just kind of useless when it comes to that. And to see a guy like Alan, who was unbelievable at that, like he remembered little details about you, and he had barely spent any time with you, and you could see like that guy, like if he went to those meetings at the British American Business Association at the British Embassy in DC, he probably would have walked out with something because he was just that good at it. And so that's and like you're saying, like you're getting better at it. I'm a lot better at it. Like I couldn't imagine doing what you and I are sitting doing right now, having this podcast. I couldn't have done that in my 20s. I was, there's no way I could have strung together, all these little thoughts and things we're going to talk about here. This is all learned.
No. You could have. You just didn't know you needed to, nor wanted to. That's
Yeah,
the
exactly.
difference.
That's probably true too. But I
You
mean,
could have
I've
it.
changed a lot. I've changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
youth is
Me too.
wasted on the young, right? It's like if I knew when I was 15, 16, 17 what I knew now, like I would have a very different approach to going after this, and I probably would have had a much higher level of success. I'm not complaining. I've done really cool things, and I've got really cool friends, and super super happy to have done what I've done, but you're looking around. It's you, Nico. It's you. So I think that's the neat lesson in all of this is realize like you have got to be a dog on a bone when it comes to trying to make this happen, because racing is one of the most prestigious. I mean, you look at the success of Drive to Survive, but those 20 seats in Formula One, there's 20 of the most prestigious athletes in the world, and that and racing is a very popular thing. Like a lot of kids grow up wanting to be race car drivers, boys and girls. So, and a lot of them have money in their family and so on and so forth. And you're just, this pyramid, as it goes up and you end up as professional racers, like I was saying, there's thousands of people that are well funded trying to get hundreds of seats. That's what the bottom line is. And so, man, oh man, building those personal relationships and having strengths like that, along with having amazing hustle out of the cars, trying to find partnerships and financial resources, all of that matters. Not everyone is Lance Stroll, that has a dad that's a billionaire that can just buy an F1 team. as the extreme other side of the coin, where like, okay, that's a pretty good move right there, son. You want to drive in Formula One? I can make that happen for you. You just have to drive and get your super license points, and then I'll put you in the car. That's the fairy tale that's so incredibly rare. But I think that's the lesson. And now, as guys that are, as you're suggesting, we're getting kind of a little bit older as far as our racing goes, but we do have this knowledge and, dare I say, this wisdom about mistakes we've made along the way, and things that have worked, and qualities in our personalities that have been really, really helpful in furthering our careers, and qualities in our personalities that maybe we should have worked on a little bit more and would have helped us get further up that ladder. And those are all the things I think that we can ponder now, and certainly are something that you and I as coaches try and pass on to as best practices. Anyone that we interact with that has aspirations of getting into motorsports themselves.
For sure. Like I always tell any young drivers, like, make sure you really want this.
Yeah, but you
Because
see how it's
it's
relative.
not
It's
easy.
like, they're like,
It's
oh
not
yeah, I
easy.
really want it. But they're like, do you want it like
Uh,
sleep in your $500 car, eat cold cereal 3 meals a day? Do you want it that
yeah,
bad? But when you say something like that to them, they're like, what? And you're like, that's what we're talking about here. You think you want it, you don't really want it, and so it's an understanding of that. I think that's really it's difficult, because anyone that we all have these different life experiences, and in their heads they're convinced they really want it. In their heads, when you're telling them to focus, they're still thinking they're focusing harder than they've ever focused. But you're saying, I want you to focus like I can focus. I want you to focus like my best students can focus. They have no comprehension what that level of focus is. They've never done that in their lives. And so we say it so casually, like, you really need to focus. This is really important, what we're talking about here. And they're like, I am. And you're like, yeah, are you?
yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, where we're saying we're teaching human beings that are really different. Like, people are different. They have very different life experiences that led them to that same point that you're with them as that prior student, like I said earlier. But they're very different people. And that always is our challenge, is to kind of, the boot camp analogy, where you've got to kind of, take them apart one piece at a time, and then try and rebuild them correctly. Going, yeah, you didn't have this dogged determination that I had, because I had an engineer dad, and I had a teacher as a mom, and I understood mechanical things, technical things really well. And I could picture things, I could visualize things, and I had, developed these car control skills sliding a Jeep around in a field. They're all things that we take for granted in a way, because it seemed like just sort of what we did, not realizing it makes us into who we are, at the end of the day. And that's our job, is to kind of find those missing things. And at the other end of the scale, like I mentioned, it could be trauma from a crash. That it's very hard for people to get over that, especially if they haven't been able to figure out why it happened. And so you've got to go through that with them and help them understand why. And why now, with having me here helping you, that's very unlikely to happen again, because we're going to figure out what went wrong. And those are all sort of the tricks of the trade, I guess, or the pieces of trying to take someone that shows up with enthusiasm and some level of skill. That's how they got there in the first place, and then assessing that and figuring out where the missing pieces of the puzzle are, and then trying to create some sort of exercises or conversations or sessions, or, hey, let's go and slide some cars around in a paddock on a skid pad. Let's go do dirt fish together. Let's go do something that helps fill in one of those little voids that we've sort of stumbled upon in your technique, and try and create that complete driver that can be one day
And
self-sufficient.
so few are willing to go do that.
Yeah, no
So
doubt.
few are willing to go do that.
That's said that in the very beginning. Like, that's the difference. That is absolutely the differentiator. It's not your speed. I mean, you can look at a guy I mean, I would say a good example racing today in IMSA is like a guy like Ben Keating, who has just kind of stayed at it and stayed at it for so long. He wasn't a super fast guy in the beginning. He's not crazy fast now, but he can hold his own now. Out there, and and he's won a lot of championships along the way, being what we would consider to be a gentleman driver. He's got a bunch of car dealerships that he's using to fund his racing. He's a lovely, nice guy, but you can see that progression that he has had over a decade of being in IMSA motorsports and racing, and his level of competency's come up to where he's only a few tenths off the pros that he's racing with. And so those are the types of guys where we're like, bravo, it can be done. A guy that comes into racing late and does it the smart way, where we always say, where go out and make a living, make a fortune doing something, and then go racing. Or like us, that had these dreams of Formula One or doing it as a career. We tried to go in without money and forge a career doing that, and had some version of success and failure along the way, but I think that's all cool. And
getting back to a Ben Keating, I think that we could have saved him a lot of time getting there much quicker.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something we've talked about. And Tommy Kendall and I were talking about that. I talked about that, with Peter Krause, any of the coaches. Like, that's the one thing we always say, the differentiator, between and people often think when they're starting out, they don't need the best coach then. It's only when they get up in the higher levels. And you realize, like, that's how you get burned out. If you don't have really, really good coaching from day one, the process is so inefficient that it's very easy to run out of enthusiasm for it. But if you get in there right away and you get hooked up with someone that is capable of teaching at the very highest level, that they're much more efficient progressing through. And it's always the argument against, the track day crowd, where they have amateur instructors kind of throughout their system. And there's a lot of variation. There's some good ones, but there's a lot of just kind of mediocre ones.
And when you finally get to work with them, you need to undo all of that work.
All of it.
To restart.
Yeah. That's really the thing, is they'll like put it, they'll put it in your head that the priority list that they're giving you, like, this is gospel, this is how great racers do it. And man, you've got to unravel all of that and going, half of that we're not even going to talk about. And they're not bringing up some really important key points that I would have been teaching you from day one. And so, yeah, they've been built now as a very flawed driver with a lot of bad habits and just bad priorities. Like, the things they're focusing on are not the right things. Make sure you're always the first guy to get on the throttle, getting out of a corner. You'll always be the fastest if you do that. It's like, really? So, but it's stuff, you hear things. I read things like that from pretty well-known coaches on the internet all the time.
Yeah.
You're just like, wow, it's a bit more complicated.
It's even worse. They're putting it in print.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's a cool thing, to kind of ponder all this and realize, and that's why I do this podcast. It's why I love having, someone like you on as a guest. It's because hopefully we can make, move the needle a little bit with people that are considering, all the different ways to move through motorsports or get interested in motorsports or hooked on it, and realizing there's some cheap, highly inefficient paths, and there are some apparently expensive, much more efficient paths. But when you add up the time and the money, the one that looks expensive is actually the cheap one, because it saves you so much time and gives you good habits right away. And you get to progress a lot faster. You probably are going to avoid a crash or two or three along the way because of this. All of that stuff. And, we're like that. It's, we go look at TVs or something, and you're just like, I'm just looking for the biggest TV I can get. at the lowest price. And it's like, you know what? That's probably not going to have a very good picture. There's going to be better TVs, or you and I doing all the Michelin work we've done. That's always been Michelin's. People are like, tires are round and black. They're all pretty much the same. So I'll just get the cheapest tire with the longest tread wear warranty, and that's the best value. And you're like, oh my God, like, are you trying to run into things? You not want to stay on the
Speaking of
road?
manufacturer engineers.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of manufacturer engineers.
Yeah. So I think all of those things, they're all the same, I mentioned the Dunning-Kruger effect a lot, in this podcast. It probably comes up every time, but the thing behind Dunning-Kruger is you don't know what you don't know. So with a little bit of experience sometimes can start to feel like, if our ego gets a hold of it, it can start to feel like expertise. And a little bit of experience, so you're just, I've spent an hour on the internet studying this thing, and I'm feeling like I'm wrapping my head around this whole thing. And that's a very dangerous thing to think, because you realize something like motorsports, or anything like it, is so nuanced that you can continually learn for your entire existence in motorsports, and you have to even remain competitive. That what you learned that first hour you were ever introduced to motorsports is not even near 100th or 10,000% of what you currently know after years and years of learning how nuanced this sport is, and how limitless the capacity to get better is in anything like this. And it's different than people that are successful at business or what have you. It's just like, it's the right opportunity. They had the right product at the right time, and not, I wish I had that ability. I certainly don't. But it's different because it's not, they think it's competitive. It's just like the person thinks they think they're focusing. They think business is competitive, but a sport is different, where you're judged literally every weekend on your result that weekend. And you're racing against people. It's not just you out there by yourself doing that, but you're racing against people at the same track with the same intentions, with the same resources at their command, and you're having to race against them. The level, I don't think people understand necessarily the level of competition that actually is in professional motorsports. I think maybe that's part of the problem too, because it's so.
I agree. And actually, the perfect example,
Yeah.
the perfect example of that is all the people that go to a track day and that say that they are racing.
Yes, I'm a racing driver.
That alone is the perfect picture of the fact that they don't understand what racing is.
Yeah, and it's fine to have fun, like,
because the driving of the car. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that track day is a bad thing. It's a bad thing. But what I say, it's not racing.
Yeah. There's so many levels to it. I think it's like, me going, hey, I'm a fairly good skier, and then I've done some races. I've won some races on skis, but then I've also skied with Olympians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the person's got legs the size of tree trunks, and it doesn't matter what gender they are, by the way. And the types of turns like that they can do. I've played tennis with professional tennis players. I'm like, I'm okay playing tennis, but that's the thing. Like, I've been humbled because I have got introduced, or I've swam with people that are at that level in swimming. And because you just go to a pool, and sometimes they're 2 lanes down from you, someone who's an Olympian, and it's freaking ridiculous. like if a swimmer is a good example, actually. And the reason I think swimming is an interesting example is because when you watch someone that swims like that, it looks like they're not trying. The stroke that they have is so genuinely efficient that you'd swear there's a cable attached underneath pulling them along in the water, because the speed that they're doing, and you're watching how slowly they're moving, and it's actually kind of uncanny, because again, you're in the lane flailing next to them, and you're trying as hard as you can, because you're gonna try and do 25 yards or 50 or however the length of the pool, you're going to try and see if you can keep up one time. So you're going to throw the coals at it and they'll just motor away from you with seemingly no effort. And you're like, how? And of course we'll go like, they must be more hydrodynamic, like, like their body, like they have a special body type that really slips through the water, but what it is like, there's again, it's that word nuance. Like they've been practicing that glide and that stroke for they talk about expertise as 10,000 hours, but with an Olympian, it's probably 50 or 100 or 200,000 hours of expertise doing what they're doing to get to an Olympic level, and you think about like the efficiency in that stroke, right? Like it's amazing to watch how they seemingly glide through the water. Like it doesn't seem, it looks more like a dolphin swimming than a human being as far as how efficiently they can move. And of course, compared to a dolphin, they're a snail. But the fact remains that that's what driving is like. Like that's what driving's like. You do your track day and you hit apexes fairly well, and you're pretty quick compared to you haven't run off the road hopefully too many times, and compared to the other people that are doing it around you, you're like, okay, this isn't bad. I'm not the slowest guy, I'm not the fastest guy. I'm kind of, I'm a racing driver, right? But it's like me just slipping into that pool and trying to swim next to an Olympian.
And the only way you can go faster is getting a tuned or a bigger turbo.
Yes, spend money. That's always, and that's that's the thing that they always,
only way.
They take the same skills to a faster class, and
That's right, yeah.
And yes, indeed, that buys you lap time because the car is faster, but you're still in the middle of the pack, right? You're always going to be there in the middle of the pack until you work on the driver mod, until you try and make yourself a better driver. But yeah, all that stuff I think is really, I think it's important, and it's a little bit of a, I caught grief even in Optimum Drive because of the things that I said about club driving and how they're very good, really good instructors in the country or in the world. It's a tiny percentage of pros that are coaches, and then a tiny percentage of them that are actually good at being coaches, and so all of those things are factors that we have, and so I caught a lot of grief for that. But I think, to be honest, I'm just trying to be honest. I'm trying to give you sort of the tough love version of this, going, if you really are serious about driving, and not just saying you're serious about driving because it makes you feel good to say you're serious about something in your life, if you're really genuinely serious about this, it is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take not only this 10,000 plus hours of practice, but it has to be focused, and it has to be intelligent, and it has to be rational. And that practice time, it has to be well spent. It's not you driving around by yourself out there for 10,000 hours.
That's right.
You'll never get a level of competence like that. We'll go. It's like I always use the sailing or the analogy where if you're 1 degree off on the compass, it doesn't seem like a big deal. For a long time, it doesn't seem like a big deal until you're trying to sail from California to Hawaii, and 1 degree off at that point has you not within sight of Hawaii when you get there. And that's the thing. You have to have these checks and balances along the way. You have to make sure what you're learning is accurate. So you're laying a very accurate foundation into your driving. And the only people that know that are people that have been there, done that, and also have the ability and the desire to articulate that to you. That's the only way you know that you're layering in an accurate foundation and you're not going to miss Hawaii when you get there. So those are the types of things I think where we can come across as seeming elitist doing this and talking like this, like, oh, you're just pissed off because it's possible to go do a track day for $200 and I have a great time and I learn there, and you think coming to you. And it's like, it's not about that. Like I said, I've got no problem with someone that wants to go do track days and just have fun. It's the ones that I worry about are the ones that get frustrated in that situation because they plateau and they think that's as good as they can be. And to me, that's really sad. That's really sad because you have to put yourself in the right environment to pull out your potential. If you're not in the right environment, it doesn't seem like you have much potential. But when you get around people that understand building drivers, you realize we can really take just about anyone, and if they'll stick with it, we can make them very competent in a race car, even at a professional level. Anyone, they've been paraplegics that are really good at it. Like, it's not even a physical thing. You can make anyone very competent as a driver if they are in the right nurturing environment. And so that's the sad part about the track day thing, is I think people time out of that, get bored with it, thinking they become as good a driver as they could be, and therefore want to move on, not realizing they have a massive amount of untapped potential that's just waiting to be discovered, that could put them up into professional racing if they really wanted to do that. They would just have to, take that step back kind of from the Dunnings-Kruger and realize, yes, I don't know what I don't know. Let me go have a conversation with someone that coaches people in that level and see if that's something that I might want to try and achieve. Again, it's all about being rational, and not irrational when we're, sort of deciding. And you make a lot of decisions based on best case scenarios, like, I'll win that championship, the next year I'll go into the next category up and I'll win that championship. And it's like, ooh, man, reality is
But
going to
even
hit
if
you
you
pretty hard over the
do,
head.
that that doesn't mean that you won't develop your full potential.
Yeah.
Even if you do,
Yeah.
because you are in the best car, you can win the championship, but you're not necessarily the best driver.
Yeah.
And then the next year you're not in the best car and you struggle and then you disappear, as opposed to the guy who finished second to you the next year. You're in a more even footage and now it just smokes you, and that's the
Yeah.
longevity.
Yeah. Yeah. You
That's
time
what
out.
sets apart Fernando
It's,
Alonso, who is still in Formula One now.
yeah.
You know?
It's funny
um,
you bring up Alonso. I literally, while I was riding my trainer before I came here, I was watching I think it was on Amazon, but there's a little mini documentary on him. And I actually wanted to ask you this anyway. So this is perfect that you brought up Fernando. But he's sort of, back in 19 and 20, well, 18, 19, where he left Formula One and he decided he wanted to go try and win the Triple Crown, which was, winning the Indy 500, Le Mans, and the Monaco Grand Prix. And so he won Le Mans in 18, I think, with Toyota.
yeah.
And of course, he's won the Monaco Grand Prix. He's won the Daytona 24 hours. He's won the Sebring 12 hours. He has a WEC championship. He tried to go do kind of along your lines there, but he went and did Dakar. So he did some off-road stuff as well. And I think, like, anyone that's like a real driver, we kind of love that. And we think that's really, really cool. And he was pretty successful at it. Obviously, he didn't get Indy, and he really wanted to. He had the 1 year where he was in the running, like he was in the lead pack very late in the race, and he had an engine failure, and then had a lot worse luck the next time he tried it. But I wanted to ask you about everyone. They were talking about the documentary, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's on this crazy level. Alonso is the best driver in the world because he can jump from car to car to car." No one does that anymore. Drivers used to do that. You and I knew Vic Elford really well, maybe one of the best all-around drivers, where he is, he was competitive in NASCAR. He was competitive in Formula One, and he, of course, was an amazing sports car racer and rally driver. He won, championships in just about everything he competed in. So maybe to me, and I'm a little biased because I really like Vic. He was just like a great character. So what a guy to talk to. the stories and the confidence. That's what was amazing about Vic Elford. Lovely guy. Of course, he passed on a few years ago. I miss him dearly. But okay, so back in the Vic days, when you're jumping from car to car to car, you literally didn't know until you got in that car. So here's my question for you, because you will know. How helpful are simulators for what Alonso did.
Oh, incredibly. I mean, they're today, if you're not using a simulator, you are not optimizing your potential in any formal way, and of course you need to. And but they're far from perfect. They need to be the right one.
Yep.
We know we've had that conversation a lot. Actually, earlier on when we were talking about Alan, I was thinking of that because we did things with him on the sim. He wasn't a simulator driver.
Yep.
But then the next morning I show up at the track, it's 7 a.m. and he's on the sim. He got himself in there, he's on the sim. He's practicing like a dog, like he always does,
Yeah.
so that he could be competitive,
Alan.
so that we could do the show as we were supposed to, where I work with other professional drivers and they're like, okay, can we embellish this and everything? Go in the short way. Where Alan, no, I'm going to learn how to do this as
Yeah.
well as you, or good enough that we can do the shot. And that's Alan. But I digress. But yes, the sim of today is an absolute. It's a tool that needs to be used just as well as your fitness, just as well as the mental training, just as well as everything else that you do. For sure, I'll also use quite a bit of it. I want to make to pin the point that Alonso, when he first came to Formula One, was the champion that he is, but he had the wrong driving technique. And we've had that conversation before, where he was still a go-karting driving style. He had a lot of success because he was in the better teams. He was the fastest on the team, but he went to Formula One, and frankly, he wasn't doing a great job. And it took a lot of beating from his engineers at Benetton or Renault at the time to finally do the work. And when he did the work, understood and became who he is.
Yeah.
But he always was the champion, the heart of a champion, but he didn't have the technique, and he acquired it as a more mature adult. He had the opportunity to do that. Is Formula One the place to do it? Probably not, but he did. And today, and that is part of what allows him. If you have the right technique, you can jump from car to car to car in any discipline and feel and read the car much more efficiently. And of course, the simulator work was a big thing. My problem is currently there is unfortunately not a great software on the simulator anymore. Even iRacing, which was for me always was the best, all of a sudden in the last 2 years or so, the direction they've been going in the tire modeling is actually worse for what we research as pure driver. The problem is that, getting back to your conversation of us sounding a little bit elitist, very few people understand that. Very few drivers don't understand that that's wrong. They believe that is correct, and they keep reinforcing that bad habit, and that's a problem that I would like to see addressed, that I talk about occasionally, and that we can talk about more and then some other day. But it's something that I would like to see corrected for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and you know me, I've always complained about it because I've always struggled. I've got two problems with me. Like, number one, the car doesn't feel right to me.
Two?
Yeah.
Just two?
Two. Only two. One is everything about me, and the other one is everything else about me. Those are the two problems. There, are you happy? Are you happy now? No, the two problems I have. The one is the car, very difficult to perceive the limit of the tire, right? Counting times I've been on a track and spun a car in the last 20 years. I mean, it's almost on one hand. And in a spin, on a simulator, like I'll spin the car all the time, and it's just like it drives me insane because I know I would catch it, and yet I can't catch it because I'm there's latency in the rig that's getting better and better. There's also just I'm not picking up on the cue that you're oversteering or you're understeering.
Right.
And so I'm allowing the car to do that, kind of ignorantly letting it do it. The other problem that I have is I have a lot of trouble focusing on a simulator because I'm kind of weird that way. And this is a personal problem, but even in racing, I need pressure. I need like real pressure, not like I'm trying to put pressure on myself. It doesn't work. I need to be on in a car, it's like Pikes Peak. Like I love that because the moment I go out on that road, I am focused because I realize a mistake is dangerous there. And I'm a different person under pressure. I'm a much, much more complete driver. When it's simulated pressure, it doesn't work as well. I have trouble staying focused. I'm again, things I admire about you. You'll sit on that sim and just drive and drive and drive, and your lap consistency is incredible. I get like 2 laps in, and I've got a couple slides I didn't expect or like, and I'm thinking about where we're going to go for dinner, like during it.
Yes, yeah, but you often only drive on the sim. You never spent enough time, and
Yeah.
actually gone into racing. Once you start racing,
Yes.
you're at
Yeah.
home, you're racing against me and other people, then that pressure would come back in. But
Yes.
I fully agree with you. And in a way, that's another benefit of it, because if you can stay focused on the sim, well, it's going to be even better in the real time, in the
You're
real life. But
100%
for
right.
sure, the
I
extra
never got
stress
good enough to
helps you.
race.
Helps you.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I never
Yeah.
really got good enough where I wanted to go and race and put my name up there and race. And
Yeah.
because of that, and I agree, the race would do it. The race,
Absolutely.
the race would do it.
Absolutely.
I haven't been able to bridge that gap between there and the racing. And it, we've talked about, you and I have talked about the tire model thing. And it's something I want to bring up, and I want to bring up for you because there is a decent chance this podcast lands somewhere where there's someone from iRacing that's watching this podcast. And so for anyone that's in that world that has that influence, there is no one I could think of, and I've worked with a lot of people that are very good at sim racing and teach sim racing. Nico is the guy you want to help you fix the tire model problem. He would do it. And you started doing it with Sim Raceway, but obviously that didn't last very long because that company was facing a very uphill battle against the established sims that were out there. So they kind of tapped out after a little while. Um, but you went that route with them and you were trying to create an accurate model for them. And I think that is the biggest thing that needs to happen in the Sims is just continuous work on the tire model, because it's too much to steal Claude Ruel's line. It's too much Band-Aid on a Band-Aid trying to make the
But
car
but the
feel
problem
right.
the problem is that most of the people that are working on it are actually, they think that's
I
right.
know.
They think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And either because their experience in the real life has not gone to that level, or because they adapt. I mean, and there are some. I mean, Max Verstappen is on there. He
Yeah.
knows the difference. He adapts with it and he
Yeah.
deals with it. So the biggest problem that you struggle with, it's because right now the tire model they have does not work with zero steer or a mild oversteer on entry, which is the biggest asset, the biggest, hardest to find skill that a driver can have at any level, any car. It's the best thing you can achieve in any car. And right now in the sim, it doesn't work. And here is why. Because if you get the zero steer going on, you may get the car pointed where you want to go. But as soon as you go back to power, because your tires are slightly overheated in a non reasonable way through the sim, you cannot put the power down. So in the low horsepower cars with little diff, like the Ray Formula Ford 1600 that they have, I'm going very specific now, it actually works decently. But as soon as you go into something with a higher power and or some kind of locking diff, it doesn't reward that at all. It actually hurts you. So you end up driving the other way around, which is wrong. Develop a driving style that will never, ever make you fast in a real car. And so you can stick to your basics, as you have said multiple times. I am so focused. I will make a setup that make it feel the very best it can, even if that means that I'm not competitive. Where before I was, I still do the best I can, but it's frustrating to now be beaten. And I know exactly why that's happening. I can
Yes.
see them on the video. I can see it on the data. I can show it on my own data because it's so good. but there is no way around it. Where before, 2 years ago, there was. I was able to make setups that still allowed me harder, but to be competitive, and now I can't. It's
So what have
just
they
I
done?
can't.
What
It's
have they done
there, and as
differently
long
in
as
the
I don't
model?
use the flaws, you can.
What have they done
So
differently
I
in the
don't
model?
exactly know, except that it's so what they do is that since they cannot really replicate the slip angle the way the tire does, when you get past the optimum slip angle, they make the heat go up.
Yeah.
And the heat goes up so far that now the tire becomes slippery
Yes.
and you lose the grip.
For understeer, it's a bad habit that we try and get people to stop doing. But because people do it, they've actually adapted the
That's
sim
right.
to allow it. Right?
That's
They
right.
and
And
that's
because so many people think it's right. And again, that
yes.
is true to go-karts as well. You know, in a go-kart,
Or
when
stability
you have
control.
understeer, you steer more, it will lift the inside rear tire and you will get it to go. So it's a very difficult battle to go. And I would love to have, inputs into that. I know I'm not talking about the coding. I'm talking about the real feedback as to what's happening and what should be happening to a
Yes.
real car
Hire
and
Nico,
at
you
the
guys,
highest level.
because that's a real problem. And of course, for the Sims, this is this reality disconnect of how the sim handles versus a real car handles is a real problem because it is always gonna affect the safety of a driver that's trying to transition from sim racing into a real car. They're also, like we were talking
Yeah.
earlier, they show up with really bad habits that now are really going to
Mhm.
prolong their transition into real cars. They're not going to be fast as quick as they would, as obviously, I mean, there's no argument here that anyone could make that an incorrect model that makes the sim easier to drive is not helping anyone in the long run. I mean, all that's doing is basically you're caving to a bad habit that people have, and that's not a good thing. And so I think it's always going to be working towards making the model more accurate and more relevant to what real race cars do. And yeah, that's a tough one. And yeah, I mean, I love playing on them. I think they're fun, but they're that's always going to be an issue. Let's talk a little bit about your favorite drivers, your influences from a driving perspective. Who do you look up to? Who do you respect, and why?
Oh, so I think you asked me about who I respect. You mean in the past or right now?
And anyone, who are your favorite drivers and past, present, you know,
So so as a kid, of course, one of my heroes was like everybody else, Gilles Villeneuve. Of course, the flamboyance, etc. Which now that I know better, had he been a little bit less flamboyant, he actually would have won a lot more.
yeah,
Had nothing to do with his fatal accident, but he would have had better results. I was always in awe of the way Niki Lauda worked, as we said before, and then that translated into Alain Prost. I have met both Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. Ayrton Senna's driving style and driving feel, as well as focus and method, were all examples to be followed.
yes,
Those were the heroes that I followed, through my youth. Then after that, it just came, in between. I always loved Kimi Raikkonen for his pure. I was not. I was one of the guys who thought he was too young when he came to Formula One. I truly believe he was, but
mm-hmm.
with his talent, he made it work.
From
And
Formula
then,
Renault to Formula One, wasn't it?
and after he took his hiatus from Formula One and figured out that, well, that was the coolest thing I wanted to do, so he went back, and then he was just the one of the best ever, pure, etc., etc. I was a big fan of Mika Hakkinen. Uh,
Yeah.
Michael Schumacher brought a whole new level of things up to Formula One because he had the dedication, the discipline, the talent, of course, but also his biggest strength was the fact that he was able to keep a team motivated around him.
Yes, yes.
And I don't know, many people don't know that most of the people that he worked with at Benetton were the same people that he worked with at Ferrari.
Ross Brawn and company, yeah.
Yeah. So and then Ross Brawn at Mercedes after that. So all this of the current drivers, I said it before. Fernando Alonso is the guy that I respect the most, but there are a lot of very, very good drivers on days. Lewis Hamilton on a good day, nobody's as good as Lewis Hamilton,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have all good days. He always has a slump in the season where his focus goes somewhere else, and so on. So, yeah, it's
I think all good choices for sure. All right, yeah, and speaking of racing and Michael Schumacher in Formula One, I just saw the documentary that Ross Brawn did or had done about the 2009 year where he won with his own car. It's an incredible story that seems out of 1960s F1, not current Formula One, where a guy buys he bought a team for $1 is what he did. He bought the team from Honda for $1, and then it was actually a Japanese engineer that stayed on that found the double diffuser loophole in the rules, gray area, undefined area, depending on how you want to look at it in the rules. And there were 2 other teams that also did that double diffuser, but they obviously did it a lot better, and then just had this literal fairy tale season where this tiny little Brawn team that didn't have enough money, wasn't paying its customers, it wasn't paying its employees, it wasn't paying anybody, and yet they're out there racing race to race, winning races on no budget, and all the other teams were actually all helping and giving them logistics support and all of that, because they were, until they realized that they were fast and then they didn't want to help as much anymore. But I was saying with Ross Brawn that, of course, he went on with Michael into the Mercedes team and sort of set the tone for that team that was ultimately so successful. But on the other end of his career, one of my favorite race cars of all time, and I should probably have him on as a guest, but Davy Jones was a driver of the TWR Jaguars. And Ross actually had designed those cars with Tony Dow, who's another really good old school guy, kind of like old school British garagista, turns it into a big thing, and all of a sudden they're winning world championships. But yeah, he designed that like XJR 14, I think it was the silk cut. It was sort of that purpley red, W.
I didn't know that was a Ross Brawn car.
Yeah, that was a Ross Brawn car. They talked about that in the documentary. I didn't realize that either. But yeah, really cool. So Ross then, and of course, then Ross goes on after he leaves Mercedes, or leaves it, his time with Mercedes with Michael Schumacher. He ends up going and becomes sort of like one of the head guys with Domenicali for actually running the Formula One championship. Now I think he's now officially kind of retired, but it's kind of neat. Of course, we're drivers, so we're always like, all right, what's your favorite driver? Like, drivers are like the only thing in motorsports. And of course, behind the scenes, you got these guys like Ross, or of course, these days, what everyone wants to talk about is Adrian Newey. And,
of course.
And just, holy cow, right? That guy. I remember Sean Jones and I were in Dubai doing a program for Ford a long time ago. And we're sitting in the Hard Rock Cafe in Dubai, and Adrian Newey was sitting next to us at the table, and Sean's like, "That's Adrian Newey," and I'm like, "Yeah, so what?" He's like, "That's the guy that gets stuff done. You want to take all the credit, Mr. Racing Driver, but that's the guy that makes stuff happen." And damn, he's right. So that's pretty amazing. So that's cool, though, Michael Schumacher. So anybody else that you can think of that was a big influence, or that you look up to, or anything in motorsports?
No, I mean, no, I mean, it's more like the people that I respect more than influence. At that point, I was really well set. They were just validating things that I was thinking were correct. Of course, Michael also had this unique driving style, which he was the only one that was trail braking all the way into the corners. Duh.
Yeah.
That's why most of his teammates could never, ever, ever match him, because he set up the car with such a stiff front end, because he wanted to be able to demand to be on the brakes all the way through. And that was one thing, like, well, yeah, I could have told you that. I mean, Alan Prost was in the same way, but not as vocal about it. But it was it's just technique. Because, and you mentioned Vic Elford earlier, completely different era, where back then, if a driver had a little hint of what he needed to do in the car, there was a major difference, as opposed to
Yeah.
today, with the amount of engineering, the amount of
Yeah.
research, the amount of data that we have.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what we need to do. It's a matter of execution, which
Yeah.
is why it became much, much harder, both from an engineering standpoint of view and from a execution of driver standpoint of view as well. So that's that. So another guy that I want to mention, and he actually has his own movie too, is Scott Dixon. This is the guy who never went to Formula One, but that is just,
So
he
impressive.
is incredible. He's always no plug and play, like they call him. Just go in there, go drive, whatever. Give him a car with 2 wheels, 3 wheels, 4 wheels,
Yeah.
7 wheels. He's gonna drive it probably as fast as anybody can,
And you see it
and
over and
hardly
over
ever makes
again, over and over again. Yeah.
yeah, hardly ever makes a mistakes. He's smart about his decisions,
Yeah.
keeps going, and keeps winning championships.
Yeah, it
So
was sort of
that's
like your point where you were talking about racing drivers and then drivers that, drivers that win championships. You said there's, all those different levels of racing driver, someone that's quick, someone that can win a race, someone that can, and I think Scott's a super example of a complete driver in that respect, where he knows when he's beat. And I used to say this all the time about Lewis Hamilton. It's like, it's not how many races you win. It's when you have a bad weekend where you finish, as far as a championship goes. And some people, when they have a bad weekend, they finish out of the points, and they'll either win or finish out of the points. They're kind
yeah,
of like, there's very binary like that. And you get the guys like Schumacher or Dixon or Hamilton or any of the people that we would call greats at driving. And those guys, when they have a bad day, they finish fourth, or fifth, and they still get a pretty good points haul. And that ends up at the end, when you're sort of adding it all up, you're tallying your points at the end. It's like all those fourths and fifths where they would have been tenths or 11ths or 12ths, with another driver that's up there racing for victories as well, that ends up winning a lot of championships. It's just that consistency of how well you do on a bad day. And it's something that's not sexy to talk about, because we like talking about winning. But
yeah, it's top flamboyant. Yeah,
it is interesting when you see that. That's the true driver. In, like, for me, when I'm the guys that I look at, it's the guys that salvage a really bad pit stop, or getting caught up in someone else's wreck, or having a new nose cone on their car, and they still end up, they might not be on the podium, but they get close. And that's like Scott's like that, like crazy, where he's you'll always see him. Sometimes they do an off strategy, and I think maybe this is a testament to Ganassi as well as their strategy. But man, they're really good at doing an alternate strategy that will put him back, fighting for the win at the end of the race, where everyone, they all know now. It's like, don't count him out. Like, yeah, he's in 22nd right now, but
yeah,
he's off strategy, and they'll get him back. And it is, he's an interesting guy, and I think his relationship with the team as well, and how well he works within the team. And I give him credit to that. Like, over, like, whenever Lewis gets put off strategy, he's like moaning on the radio the whole time. But Scott, I think Scott's like more cagey. He's like, yeah, they have a plan, and he trusts them. And
yeah.
and he's great at doing the fuel save thing, so he can get lap time out of the car and be off strategy and still end up, in the same window as the other guys after 2 pit stops. And so I think he's a great example. I'm glad you brought him up. I'm a big Dixie fan, and I think he does a very, very good job as, again, being a complete driver, but the absolute opposite of, like, the Gilles Villeneuve, woohoo, and that's what gets everyone's attention, is someone that's got the thing slapped sideways the whole time, and looks like they're always on the ragged edge. And Scott, meanwhile, championship, championship, championship. So there's a lot to be said for guys like that, and not as dynamic or as exciting, but as a racing driver, he's doing
Not
exactly
slow either. Not
not
slow
slow.
either.
No, not slow.
Just always there.
Fast with a
Always
bad
there.
car, like you said, fast in a bad car when they miss.
And I think that also what sets them, and it's for that, it's a little bit more difficult because IndyCars with the set of rules is so much more of a level playing field. But you get guys, including Schumacher, when they go back into a bad team and they're unable to bring the team back up. And that is what is, some of it is the rest of the team, is the destiny that they went on, but some guys can seem to do that repeatedly, whereas some, after a year or two in a lesser than ideal car, will just retire.
Yeah, for sure. You know who the very best example of that is? Fangio. So going way back. So he won 5 world championships with 4 manufacturers.
Yeah.
And the way he did it, and it was, again, the things you learn on YouTube or reading books or what have you, but he had a set of mechanics that he took with him. So whenever he would show up with a new manufacturer, so you're going to Alfa Romeo to Ferrari to whatever, he took his guys with him, and because he knew, he's like, it's not about so much about the car. Everyone, it's about us executing every race and getting and getting points, and so it's like making sure the car is prepared and making sure it's reliable. And obviously that's been a problem at certain manufacturers continuously. You look at Ferrari in Formula One, and man, they're so hot and cold, and they just have so many what I would call culture issues within the team, where they don't have their eye on the prize. Like, we always used to say back, when you and I were racing together with Insight Racing, but you got to be able to finish every sentence because it makes the car go faster, and you see at Ferrari, there's a lot of egos, and they're doing better. I'm always rooting for those guys because, who doesn't like to see Ferraris doing well? It's just like, it's part of the tapestry of Formula One, that team. But man, they shoot themselves in the foot a lot. They're just pumping bullets into the strategy stuff.
They have the best aim when it comes to shooting their foot.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, man, and you want it, I'd love to see Charles do well. I would love to see Carlos do well. I like both of them.
I always liked Carlos a lot. I always thought that he was underrated. And I think that his stint at Ferrari is showing that. It's showing how good he is. I would like to see those guys do well.
Yeah, it'd be really cool. That's what's always fun about Formula One. And just to clarify, we were talking, just for folks that aren't super familiar with the championships, you'd look at IndyCar and go, oh, IndyCar, that's the pinnacle of the US, and Formula One's like the pinnacle of, the rest of the world. But there's a big difference between the cars that Nico was just alluding to, where IndyCar, it's a set chassis. Everyone has the same car, and they're 2 engines. So you either have a Honda or a Chevrolet, and they're very, very close. They talk about one engine having a little bit of an advantage on the big ovals, and one's a bit better drivability off the corners on the street courses. But the cars are really, really close. And so because of that, it's a top formula, which is kind of cool, that has a spec car. And that, we're talking about Scott Dixon. That's what makes the execution, the strategy, all of that so important, because you're not ripping around like Red Bull right now going, my car is a second faster than anyone else's car on a bad day. So we can mess up. We don't have to really, try too hard. We don't have to bring updates to our cars. In Formula One, on the other hand, they make their own car, and there's only a few components on the car that they don't make. They actually even make the nuts and the bolts that put the car together. They machine those titanium fasteners and all of that. And it's really just the brakes, the wheels. What else?
Engine.
An engine may come from another manufacturer, but it might be your engine. I think that with 3 manufacturers in F1 now making engines for the 20 cars, for the 10 teams. But that Formula One's very different. So it's such an engineering exercise. And of course, the cars are bonkers around Coda, a Formula One car, I think is 16 seconds a lap faster than an Indy car. An Indy car had kind of really wide track limits, so they were using a lot of the periphery around the track, the paved areas, where the Formula One cars, if they put their inside tires over the white line, they toss that lap. So F1 cars are crazy complex, built by the teams, and that's why it's so hit or miss. Because if you've got Adrian Newey, you've got the tiger by the tail, and you literally have an unfair advantage.
Life is easier if you have Adrian Newey.
Yeah,
Life is much easier if you have Adrian Newey.
It kind of builds into our point. We're talking about coaches and all of this, where even though this is a very technology-driven sport, we've got data. We've had data for decades, and we have so much engineering, but it comes down to people. It always has. It's whether we're talking about trying to find funding to get in a race car, whether it's trying to find lap time out of your car as an engineer or as a driver. All of this comes down to relationships that you have with people and how good you are at having efficient relationships. I use that word efficiency probably way too much. But
even if you have 14 engineers looking at data, if the driver can point them in the right direction as to what is bothering you, that will make a tremendous difference. They might find it if you don't.
Yes.
But they will find it if you point it out immediately.
I was talking to Tommy Kendall, and I were talking about that specifically, where he was asking Dan Binks, who was his longtime engineer through much of the driving of Tommy's very, very successful career. Going, and again, sort of like Fangio, taking his guys from taking Dan from team to team, and then they're winning together. It kind of doesn't matter what the category is, they won because they were such an effective team, to your point. And Dan said, he told Tommy, because one of the best things that you ever did compared to any other drivers, because Tommy was just asking him after he had retired, they're out having dinner or whatever. And Dan said, you know what was really great about you, because I always said, Tommy is so technical. He's like you. He thinks like we do, And I told him, like, you must have been an engineer's dream, like a guy that loved trying different things as a driver, and he goes, yeah, I had this great relationship. And he started telling me about Dan Binks. And then he was saying at this dinner, he was asking Dan, what did you, was there anything different about working with me? Why did you like working with me for all those years? And he said, this is exactly to your point. He goes, when we did a sit down and a debrief at the very end, you would tell me what was important and what wasn't. And you said, you know what, we could fix that thing I don't like about the car 100%. And the car really wouldn't go any faster. I just don't like it, the car doing that. And he goes, but this thing, if we could fix 20% of it, that's 0.2 of a second a lap. And he said, Dan loved that because he's like, just to what you were just saying, he pointed at the thing. He's like, this is the priority. Get me this first. And then if we have time, we can work on that other stuff, but get me this. And that's worth a few positions here, and so I love that. I think that's great. And yeah, you think exactly the same way. I've always known that about you. So that's really cool. So what, in all of this coaching that you've done, of course, we didn't really talk about it. We talked about how we've been together for a long time, but Nico and I, we met, back in the sort of, like said, when we went to Sao Paulo and we're in Interlagos doing Skip Barber programs there. And then he and I became very good. We became really good friends right away because we had so many common interests. We thought of things the same way. And we were biking together and skiing together and do all those things. But my son, who's now 27 years old, the first time he ever skied, he was 2. And it was with Nico at Three Valleys in France, staying at his family's chalet there. It was an incredible experience. My son's 2 years old. It was 2 years. Can you believe it was that long ago, Nico? It's kind of crazy to think that, right? Yeah, I put him in the ski school at Maribel, and you and I driving the 360 and the S8, was it? I think that S8 going to the indoor ice karting track. That was all really fun. So we have done a lot of things together, but we worked together, and we were at Skip Barber at Special Projects, and Nico was kind of new. You had won the Barber Dodge Pro Series Championship, which is a big deal. You were racing in Formula Atlantic, which was a big deal. Formula Atlantic, just a fantastic championship. It's a shame that that went away, because it was such a great championship for so long. So many
Best,
great
car.
drivers. Yeah, it was a great car. It was a high downforce car with this high revving 4-cylinder Toyota engine in it. Just a fantastic car. So Nico was doing all that. Plus, we were working together in the special project side of Skip Barber. And then something kind of, and I guess and you mentioned it, but it's worth mentioning. We also had Formula BMW at the time. You're talking about Alexander Rossi. And so Nico was the chief instructor with Formula BMW. He and Pete Argetzinger, who's just a fantastic guy, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Pete had about 1 million stories about driving. It was always fun to spend time with Pete. And yeah, so that's kind of like our history. And then what happened was, basically through Formula BMW, actually at the World Finals, I think it was in Bahrain, there was a group of investors from this company called Pall Mall Partners that was a big hedge fund in London. And they were at the finals in Bahrain, and they basically asked this, one of my mentors, I know you liked him too, great guy, I'm still great friends with him, but Simon Kirkby, who was the vice president of Skip Barber, and he was in charge of the special projects group that we were part of. And so Simon and then Chip Pankow, who you've heard me mention before, they asked them, like, hey, we got a lot of money and we're thinking about building some racing schools. You guys seem like you've got your act together here at the World Finals. Would you be interested in coming and working for us? And what they basically said was, we'll give you a blank checkbook, and you can build a racing school. And so, of course, we're like, did you say blank checkbook? And so really, like, the Chip, myself, Simon, and Rex McDaniel, we all split off. And then as soon as I could get Nico over there, I got you there, didn't I? They're like, who do you want to be your chief instructor? And I'm like, Nico, because I wanted to do it. And they're like, nope, you're an executive now. You don't get to be the chief instructor. You've got to write all the curriculums. You get to choose the guys. And I was also responsible for the race car, which was really fun. Nico mentioned it earlier, when he said the F3 car, but we commissioned a car from Lola. This is how much money we had. We commissioned this car from Lola. There it is. Yeah, he's pointing at the picture of it. Okay, good. And it was an insane project. We spent millions and millions and millions, and I got to negotiate everything on the car. I picked the engine. I went to Mitsubishi and negotiated the engine. I went to Lola in England. I drove the car for the first time when it was put together. I did everything. That was like it was such a crazy project for me, because I had never done anything like this in my life. And here I am in an office, and working between Motec and Pi on which data system we're going to put in the cars. Remember that, Nico? We're trying to figure out which system to run in the cars, and negotiating the price for all that stuff. And it was an incredible experience. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, though. It was really difficult, because the person that they had put in charge of this project, while it was, it was Simon, Chip, myself, Rex, and Nico, and then people we were bringing in, there was somebody that was our boss that was there that wasn't a great guy, and he was a very difficult person. And it ended up being as amazing as it was also an incredibly stressful experience to go through too, because our boss was just a madman, basically. And so there was a lot going on with all that. But still, I look at it back now so fondly, to have had the experience of getting to, and what really happened, they gave us the blank checkbook. Chip and Simon decided, really with very little influence from me or anything like that, but he was like, the best school to buy is the Jim Russell School out at Sonoma at Sears Point, because it's a year-round destination. It's Sonoma and Napa. People love going there anyway. San Francisco area is beautiful. And so I bought that school. We commissioned the cars, started building buildings, actually. They're still there at Turn 1 on the racetrack. And all that's going on while we're negotiating the cars, bringing in people, writing curriculums. And it was all based on a premise. And I think this premise is really important because it set the tone for everything that we basically had done and have done from that point forward, where we were going to put students in ridiculously fast, high downforce cars. And we were going to put them in those cars from day one, and they were not going to crash them. And the reason they weren't going to crash them is because of the curriculum and the quality of the instructors. We were going to teach them car control skills, all these basic skills to such a high level that we had 100% confidence in putting them out on Sears Point, which is not the safest track in the world. There's a lot of walls very close to you there. So we go off. And here we have the world's most expensive school car that we have just created, that has a $7,000 front wing and things like that. And you're going to put novices in these cars. And that was when I really had to get to work. And it was right when I was bringing Nico in, like, who do you want? I'm like, it has to be him. Because the quality of what we were doing was going to determine whether this was even feasible or not. It's not like, well, we're going to have moderately successful students. It was going to be, we crash so many cars that this is not economically viable. That's what we were dealing with. We were taking a very high performance car, putting it on a very dangerous racetrack, and then putting novices in it and saying, we can control this situation because our curriculums are sound and our instructors are the best. And it worked. And it was amazing. It was hard. And unfortunately, this was going on. It started in 2004, 2005, we were building. 2006, we started like a soft launch. 2007, we were starting to really go. We got Audi sports car experience. We had Mitsubishi. Once I had good ties there because I was racing with them, got the engines from them for the school car. And this school car was the third fastest Formula car in the US. It was behind IndyCar, Indy Lights car, and then it was our car around the track. It was a very, very fast car that we had built, that we were using for the school. So it was really cool. And so we had all of that, really starting to ramp up. We were actually even going to expand greatly. I had done a couple of trips with Chip, and we had been to Hockenheim Ring. We were going to buy the Hockenheim racetrack and set up one there. We also had I was going to say Adrian Newey, who's the track designer that does all the track stuff. Peter Tilke. Tilke had designed a complete facility with our input in Singapore. So we were going to put one in Singapore. So all of that was all in the plans happening 2007 into 2008. And then we know what happened in the fall of 2008. Economic meltdown. We were funded by a hedge fund, a hedge fund that, just like every hedge fund in 2008, 2009, basically lost 90% of its value or pretty close to that. And the plug got pulled on the whole project. And then the whole thing was sort of left kind of floundering. And then someone came in, and Nico stayed there, worked for them, and that was Sim Raceway, where I was talking about he was actually able to help them with their simulator accuracy when we were talking about simulators a little bit ago. So that's kind of how it all worked. And also within that period of time, I was racing Volvo, and then I was doing some stuff for Mitsubishi, and then I ended up at 2009 or so with a BMW team in Continental Tire. And then I brought in Steve Dinan, who you might remember from a podcast I've already done, just a great race engineer, good guy. We took over that team a little bit. We, just by bringing in really good personnel. And I brought Nico in to drive as well, and Tyler McQuarrie and Jeff Westfall. And we got to do that for a little while. Again, we kind of had crazy bosses where The guy that actually started it all, where I had the first conversations with him and we started the team, ended up in jail, and now he's no longer with us. So that was he was kind of a wild guy, and paid the price for all of that. But that's kind of all going on. Oh, and by the way, during all that, I'm the STIG for Top Gear too. So that's happening at the same time as well. So that's kind of and so Nico is the chief instructor, like he's my guy, right? And so he's the one I'm trusting to basically keep these students safe in these very, very fast cars around a very sketchy but awesome, one of my favorite all-time racetracks, Sears Point. But it was quite, and so that's why we have such a history together. I mean, and then meanwhile, between all that, like I mentioned, we're skiing together, we're mountain biking together. You know, we're at Antidive. You know, Nico lived in Santa Rosa for quite a while, and so he was right next to this really good state park there that we mountain biked at 2-3 days a week. We'd be up there after work, racing each other. There are a lot of good memories there at Antidive, Nico. You and I having just great times. Trying to climb up North Burma, trying to keep up with you. And we just rip around there. It's really fun. So that's kind
13 years over there.
yeah, it was a long time. And yeah, I brought him up from San Diego, which he's never forgiven before because Nico, he lives in Florida now. He's a big fan of warm climates. And he's a guy that actually complained that San Diego was too cold for him. He likes the humidity of South Florida, you know, Brazil, right? That's what he likes, is that climate. So we've had just so much fun together. And when I say fun, we have had fun the whole way, but serious projects, serious stuff, whether we've been in race teams together, whether we've been running schools together. And again, I just have always had just the most amount of respect for you and your work ethic. I said that in the beginning, but and from that, I would just say the general word is like professionalism. You are a professional driver, from tip to tail in your approach, again, to the physical side of things and your fitness and your triathlons and success there. You know, the physiology side, the psychology side, and then just, you know, outright driving ability as well, and ability to articulate that. So really, really cool. So I think we're getting almost close to saying we can call it a podcast. But I want to give you an opportunity, like anything else you can think of, anything optimum drive-ish you want to talk about, best practices, stuff that you see, you know, anything like that. I think that'd be cool. Again, knowing you and all the things you've done, I think the listeners will really appreciate anything you've got.
So earlier on, you mentioned, I don't know if it was online or offline, you mentioned about what I've seen as the biggest mistake. And that's what I want to be on. And the biggest mistake is to try to emulate someone that you don't really know. Because I've seen that over and over again from every level, even at the karting level, the young kids. Another kid is faster than them, and they just try to do the same thing he's doing without understanding why they're doing it. And sometimes they are actually doing a better job, but their cart or their car is not set up correctly, or they're not there yet. And now by transforming their style, they actually make a mistake. So rather than try to copy, try to understand what you're doing, why, and how is it working. We all have some degree of feel. And if you have enough bandwidth, meaning that I always used to say that when I used to be younger in my racing career, I either was the test driver or the racing and qualifying driver. But when I was qualifying and racing, it was much harder for me to understand what the car was doing. So even in qualifying, I used to tape. Back then, data was that I used to tape the timing screen, because as soon as I saw a lap time that was good, I would try a little bit too hard and make a mistake. As opposed to if I did it free flow
By feel.
or completely in flow, I would do better. So that was the thing. Focus on what you feel. You have it. You just, the more you focus on that, the more you would develop the ability to do so, and the better you will be. as opposed to if you're trying to copy something that you don't understand, you will never grasp the whole thing. That's the biggest advice and the biggest mistake that I've seen done, and that I would say, I would tell to people.
I think that's a really cool observation, because to be honest, I haven't had anyone say that particular thing, and yet, as you mentioned, it's incredibly common. I think it
I
goes
don't
back.
I don't typically say it freely.
Yeah, oh, there you go. Thanks, buddy. It kind of goes back to when we were talking about holistic, right? Where it's a system, and it's a complex system. Whether you want to acknowledge all the components of that system or not, you've got to understand that. And I always talk to people like about walking, where there's over 500 different muscle contractions during walking that's
That are
occurring.
ingrained.
It's incredibly complicated, and we learn those things as a toddler, one muscle firing at a time. It's why we start out so unstable. And then slowly, as we're engaging all those muscles that are helping balance our walking and make that cadence smoother, that the walking just gets better and better and better. And meanwhile, we're just ingraining those new muscle memories in there to allow, this program we're calling walking to become productive and efficient and good. And so that's what it is. So, whenever you're learning something, we only learn them one at a time. And if you go and like steal something from, or borrow, or fake it till you make it, however you want to put it, where you're just going to copy, you're copying it, but you're putting it into your system. And as Nico's saying, you're probably going to mess your whole system up. Like, it's not going to help you. And you have to look at them holistically, just as you understand. You have to look at your own system holistically. Like, anything in there that doesn't work, even though they're not all the best, all the individual components are not the best, it doesn't matter. It's like a lap time. You don't have to be better or faster than everyone anywhere or everywhere, because every lap or every corner is a compromise in one way, shape, or form. You're just looking for a faster lap time, and you're looking for a faster lap time with hopefully the same tire wear they're getting out of the car. That's kind of the goal. Or it could be the same lap time with less tire wear than they're managing to get out of the car. Those are the advantages that we're looking for as racers. And again, it's a pretty complex thing. And we're just like learning to walk. We're putting all those little new pieces of that puzzle in there one at a time, because we can only ever consciously focus on one thing at a time. We're trying to ingrain this, again, the whole system. Every component doesn't have to be better. It just has to holistically add up to better. So the sum of the system needs to be the better driver. And so it doesn't mean you're the best at everything that is involved in driving. It just means when you add it all up, you're quicker. And that's why for us, we're always chasing efficiency, going, and that's why we always know, even if you're the best driver in the field, you can drive better than that. Even if you're dominating a championship. And those are the truly, pardon the corny pun, those are the truly driven people, are the ones that are never satisfied with their performance, because they realize, even though they're the quickest that day, there are other people out there that are doing things better than them. And that drives you crazy. That drives them crazy.
The worst saying ever. I had the perfect lap. Like, no, you didn't.
No, yeah. Like, ooh, don't say it. Never even a perfect corner. It's like there's always something that can be better. And, I think that it really, a lot of it comes down to, and that was sort of the epiphany with Optimum Drive, why Optimum Drive is very different than any other driving book, is because I put the emphasis on the importance of the tire. Like, it's really about tire management. Like, that's the great racers. And if you look at the racers that, there are a few championships in racing where you can run the tires as hard as you want, and in the length of that race, they don't wear out. There are a few championships that are like that, usually short sprint race type things. That happens in karting sometimes, because they want the tires to last the whole weekend.
Even if you have such a tire, if you're overstressing the tire, you're robbing power. So it's costing you speed one way or another. Maybe immediately or at the end. It's all about the efficiency of the tire. It's the only thing touching the ground.
Yeah.
So you gotta optimize it.
So that's where all of it kind of came together, was writing it sort of from the, if The Art of Racing in the Rain was written from a dog's perspective, Optimum Drive was written from a tire's perspective. And from that, it's like just a different, again, a different priority list, a different emphasis. Like, this is more important than that. It's not your style that's important. It's not your car setup that's important. It's your damn tires that's important. And you should be adapting your style and your car setup for the tires to get more efficiency out of the tires. And that'll ultimately be the fastest possible combination for that car that day. Because, like Nico just said, it all goes through that tire. So if you're overstressing it, if you're going to send overstress, you might not think you are, but if someone is more efficiently getting the same lap time you are, you're relatively to them, you're overstressing it and you're wearing the tire. It might feel perfectly good to you, but obviously, like we said, nothing's perfect, and it could indeed feel better. And that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, like, we're always doing that. And that's why do we complain about the tire model on sims? Because the tire is so important. It's the foundation of all of the driving. So if the tire model doesn't behave like a real tire behaves, then everything you're doing, as you said, you're learning to drive.
It's not important at all at 80 or even 90%.
Exactly.
But to get the last 10% of that performance, it's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, and that's another point that you hear me often make is everyone's like, oh, you can drive lots of different ways. And I'm like, you can if you're below the limit. But if you're genuinely trying to competitively race a car, there aren't a bunch of different styles. There is just efficiency with the tires that day with your setup. That's your style. And you need to adapt. And when we were talking about Fernando Alonso jumping from series to series, or Vic Elford, or, that's what's going on, is you have to adapt to what that particular tire needs on that platform in that race. Like, how long is the fuel? What's the stint? How long do I need to make them last for? All these things. We're talking about Scott Dixon's brilliance in IndyCar, always working his way back. He's managing tires. I always say it about Lewis Hamilton. He's very, very good over a stint at getting lap time, minimizing degradation.
Lewis is very good at that, but what he's very good at is racecraft. Is the fight with the other people. That's what, for that, even better than Dixon, I would say, because Dixon will make it on efficiency and use a strategy for him. But when he gets to the fight next to each other, that on a good day, that's where Lewis is top notch.
Yep, and it's also like, if you've got
one thing I want to add on to, when you jump from class or series to, one of the big adaptation that one needs to make as a driver is when you go from the adhesion to traction, meaning to the dirt as opposed to asphalt or ice. And that's, one thing that many drivers, they don't even, me mentioning those two terms, they don't even know what that is.
Hardly anyone. And that's from Michelin. Like, we have this knowledge.
Yes.
And
I was going to say, some tire manufacturers don't know what I mean.
We learned that, that's a cool thing. And I tell that story all the time. It's actually super relevant here. I'm in Colorado, and so we're dealing with snow all the time, and so they don't understand the difference between adhesion and traction, and why in the winter sometimes you want adhesion on ice or on cold pavement, but on a loose surface where the surface is looser than or softer than the tire. Then it becomes a traction surface, and that's when the lugs start biting in. You can kind of visualize that, I think, where that's traction, and it's a very different technique to drive. Like, you'll see rally drivers who are on the throttle, because in a traction situation, you're actually throwing material. You can think of if you were just sitting there on the sand on a buggy, and you crack the throttle on a dirt bike or a buggy or whatever, and it throws all this sand. That the actual weight of the material is proportional to the amount of thrust you're getting.
Yeah.
So that's what's pushing you forward, is throwing it backwards. It's kind of like how a rocket works.
Sleep angle no longer matters.
What's
Sleep
that?
angle no longer matters.
Yeah.
Slip angle no longer matters. It's
Slip
all
angle no
about
longer
moving.
matters. So you get massive slip angle. You watch Supercross, and as soon as they tip the front of the bike in, they go full throttle because they realize they're going to throw more material, and that's going to provide thrust to the inside. So it increases their cornering speed because they're actually throwing material to the outside. So that's getting thrust towards the inside. They can corner harder. That does not work in adhesion. Adhesion is a
Oh,
molecular
no.
level bond with the surface. So it's literally like the tire molding its shape into the irregularities of the surface. And that's an actual molecular bond that's occurring there. And if you pull it, if it slides, you tear the surface of the tire, you generate heat, and the car goes, and you build up temperature, and you're not going fast while you're building too much temperature. So it's a little bit inside baseball. Like you said, some tire manufacturers are like, what? But it is really important, when you think of like guys that are drifting. It's why drifting is slower, because the sliding tire, it gets so hot so quickly. And as soon as it gets over that peak, its grip drops. So it is awesome. We all love drifting cars. It's super fun to do, but it's never ever
For
going
a
to be
minute.
fast unless
For
you're
a minute.
it's never going to be fast unless you're in a traction situation. Then sliding works. So that's why you see, in rally and off-road and motorcycles off-road, all of that, they're always sliding and they're always pinned on the throttle. And I think there's a
On
romance
dirt.
that people love the idea of being pinned and going, but racing on a surface where we're dealing with adhesion, it's very different. There must be incredible finesse at work there to balance those forces and treat those slip angles very, very carefully, and realize, a little bit of slip angle going in is a good thing. But once you get the car settled mid-corner, you want the slip angles to get more even, so the car's cornering at its maximum. And then we've got to free up some available grip to be able to go power down efficiently on the way out of the corner. And the whole time we're just imagining this little molecular bond at the surface, almost sliding, and we're trying to keep it right there in that window. And a lot of the zero sphere stuff that I talk about in the book, because it sounds like, and it's good to make this point, a lot of times to people, it sounds like rotation into a slow corner is sliding, and it's not. Oversteer is defined as a rear slip angle that's higher than your front slip angle. And the tires build slip angle as soon as you start cornering. So you can have a higher rear slip angle than the front with none of the tires sliding, and that car is rotating into a corner. And so that's what you're actually doing. Like, the really great drivers are driving on such a knife edge, as I'm describing, where they're right at the limit of the tire sliding, manipulating just 1 degree differences in slip angle between the front and the rear tires. And what it equates to is maybe 1 or 2 pounds of variation on brake release as they're release, pause, release, release. They're just balancing the car going in. And then again, tiny variations on steering rate and amount, balancing the force at the tire. And it's always, remember, it's the sum of those things that the tire sees. And so that's where you can be a little bit different sometimes. If you're not using as much steering, you can use more braking, so on and so forth, as long as it sums up at the tire to be putting the tire in that moment, in that corner, right at its peak slip angle for maximum efficiency through the corner. But yeah, Nico and I can go for days on that. and it's cool, because that's when, I asked you in the beginning, because you're saying how you picked up on things so quickly. And I was asking about visualization. And that's, to me, like that, I've told people before, but my visualization when I'm driving is tires. I think of slip angle, and I imagine the tires, and I feel the car yawing, and I know that the car will break free at 3.5 degrees of yaw in the back, of slip angle in the back. That's when it'll let go. And I'm trying to hold it at 3.4, 3.3, or maybe let it go over a little bit, but not much. And just kind of playing in that realm. But to me, my visualizations after 30 years of doing this, that's kind of where I land when I'm driving. I'm always doing it as a feel experiment. But really, if I'm saying, what am I feeling? I'm feeling front and rear slip angle. when I'm in corners. Of course, longitudinally and braking, I'm feeling all four tires slip angle there as well under braking to threshold brake effectively. And then that moment of turn in, the moment of truth, when you transition from braking into cornering and having the car at the right place at the right time, at the right speed, at the right yaw rate. You know, the four things that go into a good corner entry. I always think about that too, because if you can nail braking and corner entry, the rest of the corner is easy, you know, relatively. But it's, you know, you're playing catch up from a bad corner entry where you just hemorrhage time, over slow or going too quick or too early or too late or whatever it is, or too slow a rate. By the way, Nico, as I'm rambling, I did want to talk to you about this as one of the things that I see a lot, even in professional driving now, progressive steering. I see people steering slow initially and then adding at the apex in very high levels. It's something you'll do in a slow corner that you're trail braking in. It's okay to do it there, but I see people doing it in medium speed and fast corners. Have you noticed that too? Like a lot now?
Yeah. That's exactly the grab that I was talking about. All the simulators today promote that driving style. And again, karting does demand that to some degree. So this is now a lot of these young drivers that have made a transition too rapidly without somebody like you and me to break them down to go and they become, no, they are never optimizing this. It's the difference between Checo Perez and Max Verstappen.
That's
Checo
a
Perez
good
does it.
analysis.
Verstappen does not.
Yeah.
Because whether no, I don't like his dad, but he actually was there and taught him. And Max actually had the talent to feel him himself. That is the difference between the two, and that is a rampant problem. Many
It's
of our
everywhere.
superstars are driving that way,
Yes,
and
I
it's just
see a
wrong.
lot of that. And just to
Yeah.
give you an idea why it's not good, because you're again, and how come you trail brake rotating into a slower corner? So you are, since you are on the brake, you're changing speed, and as you're changing speed, it's okay to add steering because that steering would have been too much at the higher speed. But
As long as you don't break that,
exactly.
load it.
But
Yeah.
at any sort of momentum corner where you're not trail braking, or maybe you're only trail braking just at turn in, just a little bit, depending on the car. But any corner where you're trying to carry momentum through, radius is king. You've got in trail brake corners, you're using the rear to point the car. So that's why a little bit of progressive steering is not hurting you. It actually works with the trail braking. It works to get the car to the apex and get the car pointed. But
Well, better than adding the steering, you should just go and take out the correction. Say it's a 90-degree
absolutely,
steering, you're turning at
that's zero
75,
steer.
and
Yeah,
once the zero steer goes away, you need to come
yes.
to the position. That is not really adding into steering. You're eliminating the correction.
It's radius. If you look at the overall car radius, though, like the radius
Yeah,
is
sure.
tightening going in. So that's kind of
Yes.
so why that's wrong. It works there again because we're using a trail brake rotation that's pointing us, that lets us get the throttle. It's a very efficient, specific technique for slow corners to minimize understeer and therefore get you the throttle earlier, and overall it's quicker. But in a momentum type corner where you're basically, your goal in a momentum type corner is the highest minimum speed you can get. You just want the highest minimum speed. You don't want to over slow the car into the corner. Well, if you're making, instead of it being a nice smooth radius through the corner, you're making it more of a point in the middle because you're steering slowly into the corner and not getting to your maximum steering angle until you're near the apex. You're creating a tight section of the corner right in the middle, which automatically, because 15 GR squared, radius equals mile per hour, that tighter radius demands that you're going slower or the car slides. So if you're getting through that corner without the car sliding in the middle and you're steering even a little bit progressively, your minimum speed mid-corner is lower than it could be than if you were taking a constant radius. And
Well, even if you were to go into the slide, the precision, me being me, even if you go and break into the slide, you're still not going to stay on that track. The slide is going to slow you down more and then bring you in. So It's not, no. Even if you do go into the slide, it's still going to make you slow.
Yeah.
So it's the only way is to make the correction on your.
Absolutely. So the thing is you should, any fast momentum corner where we're more concerned with minimum speed, in other words, corners you're not trail braking into, those corners should be taken at a constant radius. Now, the difference in that, how does it look? The turn in, and this is what made me think of it, the turn in is much more aggressive in that type of corner. And of course,
Sure.
how aggressive it is. You're trying to get to your radius immediately, because the longer it takes you to get there, the more progressive your steering is, and the more of a peak you've got in the middle of a corner, and the slower that corner's mid speed is going to be, or minimum speed. So it's a really, and it's funny.
One of the best corners. One of the best corners to see that is Silverstone, the old
Yes.
the
Oh my
first
God.
corner.
The 6G turn in. Yeah.
6G turn in, and you're always like, oh, what just happened? But you have to get there quick. So you need to move your hands very sharp to the point. It's only the few degrees before the limit that need to be smooth, but you need to get there and go, as opposed to now they're all smooth and then they keep adding. You're like, no.
It is. You nailed it. It's a byproduct of trying to be too smooth.
Yeah.
That's what's in people's heads. They're always trying to be smooth. And smooth is great. It's the only way to drive a car at the limit. But smooth, like how smooth you need to be, is always determined by available traction at any given moment. So while you're not going to get to snap it in like a Formula One car at Silverstone or Portimao, or I saw I mentioned this recently, but the Degna corners, they had the in-car going at Suzuka. Totally flat corner was 5.6 Gs, and it's a short little sharp corner, the first Degna. The second one's tight, but 5.6 Gs. And if you look at that turn in, again, it's available grip at 150, 60 miles an hour. A Formula One car you can pretty much, just like you can hit the brakes at that speed as hard as you want, and you cannot physically make the tires lock up. You can almost turn the car in as hard as you want, and it will do it. And that's the beauty of downforce. But even without downforce, if we scale this down all the way down to a Formula Ford with no downforce, this little conversation still applies. You can't do it like an F1 car, but you can still turn in a lot more aggressively than you do in a low-speed corner. And again, it's all about available grip. And what you should be trying to achieve is the maximum radius through that corner, which means a turn in, you're trying to achieve that radius immediately. And what people will do is they'll generally turn in a little earlier than they need to if they're progressive steerers, and they'll kind of arc it on up and by, and then finally steer it down into the apex as they're adding steering the whole way through. And they'll do that through fast corners, and it's incredibly slow to do that. And so you got to always appreciate, it's why I was talking about that visualization. It almost all comes together. It's like you have to understand how much available grip you have at any given moment. And just like when you go to the brake pedal to threshold brake, you take advantage of that available grip immediately, because especially if it's aerodynamic, it's going to be gone. It's digressive braking. The downforce goes away with speed, a square of the speed, and you lose that downforce very quickly. And you're braking 50 meters before the other guys in the same car going, how are they doing that? It's just brake pressure. So if you can wrap your head around the digressive braking thing I was just describing, imagine that at turn in, it's the same thing. We don't want to progressively steer the car. If we have available grip, we want to get the thing in right away.
One big caveat, because a lot of people will translate what you're saying into just steering more. And that's not it. It's steering fast,
less quicker is what it is. It's steering
faster, but to a smaller steering angle.
Yes, exactly. You're getting it to that angle. And again, if you just drew it out on a piece of paper, you'd see exactly what we're talking about here. If you make it have a peak in the middle versus a nice smooth arc through there, it's a different radius, and all it is a turn in. Instead of, you're going to steer a lot more progressively once you get to the apex. than if you just turn it in and do a constant radius through the corner. And that's it, because radius equals miles per hour. That's simply why it's faster. But again, I think it comes from a lot of people try and be too smooth in those situations and not appreciating available grip, going, there's no reason to gently turn this car in. You know, I could be more aggressive, which could put me on more radius, which could ultimately make me faster. So those are really tricky, and it's pretty advanced, but those are super examples. Like the soft brake hit or the progressive steering input are really great examples of things that we see people do all the time because they didn't have someone to have this talk with them. And they were simply told over and over again to be smooth. This is how you end up doing it. You want to be really smooth.
And they didn't have a quality enough data trace with someone to interpret it. Because if you only benchmark to something that is mediocre, you're only going to get to the mediocre. It's very hard to find something that is really optimum for you to benchmark.
Yes.
And that is also what made, Jim Russell Sim Raceway apart, because we had that,
So. We had that data lap from you, generally, from the pro driver, the chief instructor that was the fastest guy in those F3 cars. And therefore, whether it was a rank amateur showing up that got it as a gift card for Christmas or Pietro Fittipaldi, we had a data lap for them, and it was something they could aspire to. And so you could point that out. And this is, you heard me say nuances quite a bit earlier on. These are very specific nuances that are, when you get pretty good at driving, doing these mistakes, you can probably get within a second or so of someone that's exceptionally quick in the car. It depends on the car. All right, a really short track, would you give me that? I'm saying if you're doing small versions of this, but you're driving the car at the limit and you're balancing the car, but you've got slightly progressive steering and you're not quite as hard on your initial brake hit. So I'm not talking about kind of a lost cause here, Nico. I'm talking about Perez versus Verstappen. That's about the difference between them. It's probably about 4 or 5 tenths, right?
Perez is still an F1 driver. He's still very, very good.
Yes. Yes. But I'm saying that there's that difference between those two.
And absolutely. There is a half a second.
And it comes down to these little things that we were just talking about. It comes down to these little things we were just talking about. And it is like, we talk about.
I would say the last 2 seconds on most tracks, the last 2 seconds.
But I'm talking about people that are really competent professionals that make these mistakes. These are the last few tenths of a second that matter. And literally what Optimum Drive was all about. I didn't want to write a book about becoming good. I wrote a book about the difference between good and great.
And the great.
That to me is interesting. Becoming good, there's 500 driving books in various languages on how to become good at it. I think I have the only one that isn't about that is only about the difference between good and great. And it starts at a zero knowledge driver because, like we're suggesting, you want to learn from the beginning, not just, I don't need to learn about the difference between good and great when I'm trying to become good. And I'm saying, no, you should always have, because then, like Nico said, you're not going to build bad habits. You're going to have good technique right from day one. And that means you're not having to unlearn and learn as you go. And that gets expensive, dangerous, and frustrating. And so
I'll make an analogy to what you just said. The baby that just comes out of the womb and has to learn how to walk. Instead, we're just going to teach him to walk on his hands most of his life. And then we're going to tell him to do it on his feet. He's obviously not going to be proficient at it. And that's what most people do.
Yes.
They go, I don't need the optimum way right away. I can do this way. I'm going to walk on my hands until I'm taught.
Yes.
No. Try working on your feet first. You're going to fall harder, but it's going to be better ultimately.
You and I know, because we're doing this every single day of our
Yeah.
lives almost, we're dealing with drivers. And this progressive steering thing and lack of understanding of degressive braking are the big ones as far as speed. That's where people will plateau again at some variance of time below what a really great driver will do in that car. And then the other big one that we've already talked about when we were talking about sim racing, because sim racing is very good for this, is the racecraft side of it. Just how well you interact with the other drivers and realizing that, man, oh man, some of them are really clever. Some of them are really experienced. Imagine trying to race against Scott Dixon or Lewis Hamilton. Like, they've been there, done that, and it's very difficult. And again, you have to make an advantage. Like, you have to figure out something. You're like, in a wheel-to-wheel race with these guys, it's going to be tough to outthink them, to outsmart them. So you got to show up at that point in the party with a better car because you've out-engineered them somehow, or your pit strategy put you on a better tire at that moment or a lighter fuel load. That's how you're going to get someone like that. It comes down to incredibly fine little splitting hair details. And to us, I mean, that's everything. That's what we love about this sport. And hopefully you've heard us throughout talking about driving and having Nico here as a guest. And you're just as amazing as I hoped you would be, Nico. It's been so much fun. But you see that, like, the devil is in the details here, and doing things correctly, efficiently, there's that word again, are really the key to this. And having a set of really keen, experienced, quick eyes to look at whether it's your data trace, or to co-drive with you and jump in the car and set a lap for you so you can jump in and you can race together in an endurance series, which is really something popular that Nico and I have done, and professional drivers have done for a very long time. But that's how you get it. We talked about Ben Keating earlier. That's how these journeyman drivers end up becoming very competent as racing drivers. And when it comes to finding that ultimate last few tenths that put you on a pole or qualify you 10th, a lot of it is in these little tiny details like we've just been describing here, with rate of steering into certain corners. I mean, technically, you'd look at it, 99 out of 100 people would probably look at that and go, you're right on it, dude. It must be something with your car. But if you get a good enough coach, they're like, here it is. Look at your steering rate. It's too slow in these fast corners. And oh, by the way, I didn't say it. I wanted to say it. But people steer progressively for the same reason they turn early. They're not confident. It takes confidence to snap the car in, to transition it aggressively. And it seems like, because you're like, I've done that before, the car spun right away. It's like, yes, it could do that if you did too much of it. It could, or it could go straight into understeer. It could do either of those things. But it goes back to the holistic thing and understanding all these little parts of driving and putting that all together to know, again, what the available grip is at the moment and going, you know what? I could use that available grip to turn in much more aggressively than I am now through this fast corner, and therefore turn the wheel less, and therefore have a bigger radius, and therefore go faster. Those are the types of
that's one of the most difficult things for the drivers as they go further and further and further in the high downforce cars.
Yes.
I always say, that's it. You need to know 5Gs. And the analogy I always use is the MotoGP guy, where, I ride a motorcycle, and I could go nice and gently, and I will go get to the pegs and go. And you watch the pros, and they go bing, bing, bing. Yes. They go right to the PG immediately. They do what I do in a car. Yeah, I'm a good rider, not a pro rider, but I'm a pro driver.
No, I know, and I'm exactly the same way, and I've used that same comparison because I love the motorcycles, I love the bikes. Like a mountain bike, I can slam a mountain bike down pretty hard because I'm fairly handy on a mountain bike. But me compared to a really good motorcycle racer, a MotoGP guy, oh my God, it'll take me a week to get down to full lean angle. And of course, at this point, those guys are dragging shoulders. elbows and now helmet.
But that's tires.
Also touching.
That's tires. That tires
It
are so
is.
sticky
It is.
now.
But to be able to put the bike down, it's true, and it's a great visual because I think everyone could visualize that. So I'm glad you brought it up. But it's fantastic to think how quickly they snap it down
They
versus
snap it down
ease
right
it
to the
down
peak.
right to the limit because they know, just as we're describing, it's exactly the same reasoning. It makes the radius bigger if you do that, right? So it's something to be very cognizant of in your driving. And again, finding a coach that's capable of finding things like that, because telling someone to brake later or get on the throttle, get to full throttle sooner is very weak coaching in my eyes. There should be a lot more to it than that. There should be a lot more of the why, as you were describing. There's a lot more of the why behind it, so you can figure out why they're not doing it, and therefore create some sort of scenario where they can get over that hurdle by getting them experience again. Whether it's in a paddock, that's very often the case. Get them experience and isolate this little variable that's tripping them up. Because like I said, that brake application all the way down to that brake release and turn in, that's it. That's the whole sport. You do that well,
that's it.
You're really going to be fast in a car. It really makes the difference. And then the other thing we add to that is racecraft. But it really is brake application and the turn in. If you can nail that, have that brake zone as short as it can be, and have that turn in as snappy as it can be, so your radius as big as it can be, again, while maintaining the balance of the vehicle in the corner, because all that has to happen for it to work. But that's the stuff that makes drivers great. And then through that, you get this finesse of tire management. And you understand that because I can be quick in these areas with a really well-balanced car, you're not overdriving the car in other places trying to make up with your lack of speed through a high-speed corner or your lack of braking ability. And you tend to chew through tires because of that. But once you're right at the true limit of what the car can do, you can be super efficient with the tires because you're not having to, again, overdrive and compensate. You're just driving to the limit everywhere. And I said this, and it's the thing, I don't know if you think like this too, but again, with the visualization thing, when I get really dialed in, I did some really good karting lately, by the way. I haven't karted in a long time, and it was awesome. God, I love karting. I know you're karting tomorrow, and I'm trying to buy a shifter cart off Tim Moser, actually, because I really want to go karting. But karting is so pure in feel. Like the feel in karting, you can't match it in anything else. Maybe a Formula One car, but in most stuff that most people can accept, get a hold of and drive, a kart is almost like the best. Even though the technique's slightly different, as Nico mentioned, and you can build some bad technique in karts that you have to unlearn a little bit when you get in a car. The actual genuine feel is so brilliant. And that to me, I mean, that's what I just really, really adore, is just finding those little tiny efficiencies, because the feel is so direct, and you can really, really, really picture and visualize speed in a kart, because it is so direct. There aren't many things in the way kind of clouding the message the kart gives you right from that contact patch to your brain. You can really feel them, and it makes it so cool. But I really love that feeling, and I think that's the place where you should go and do it if you've never done it. Like, go drive a kart. Anyone can do it because it's not particularly expensive. Even a top, and you don't need a top kart, like a 125 is too fast really to start out in. But starting in a lower classic kart, or a Rotax or 100 or something like that, those things are amazing. Do that for a couple of years, work your way up into maybe something that's a 125. It doesn't have to be a shifter kart, but they're so quick that all these techniques and things that we're talking about, you can feel them and you can visualize them, and really.
Or you're gonna feel them.
And you're
Or you're
gonna
gonna
feel
feel them. They're gonna hurt.
You'll feel them the next day, and probably the day after that.
Yeah, shifter karting is so violent at the same time. It's very difficult to actually extract the finesse. So unless you're in top tip shape, I would highly recommend go to like a single speed instead, which is still fast and faster through cornering, and you get on the field. but you don't have the violence. That being said, the shifters with the front brakes demand slightly more of a driving style like the cars. And it's definitely, you have to shift, you have all this. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're going to get one.
Yeah, I need one. I mean, I just realized, like, after I just did that the other day, it was just such a, I don't know, it just felt so good. And I think one of the last times I drove was when you and I were doing that enduro, like back in the day. Like that's one of the last times I've been in a kart. So to get in a kart, I was just like, oh my God, it's just pure magic. But when you're thinking about trying to, again, optimize all these things, it is just getting seat time, absolutely. Getting with the right guy. I think you could see, like, Nico, right guy, like someone that really understands what it truly means to distinguish between good and great. Like, where are those last few tenths? Why is Max faster than Sergio? That gets asked all the time, and Anthony Davidson and Karun are not answering that question like we literally just did now. They're just like, oh, yeah, he's having an off day. The setup is set up around Max.
I think Anthony could.
What's that?
I think Anthony could.
He probably could.
I think Anthony Davidson could. He just chooses not to.
Yeah, that's maybe true. He keeps a little bit of that info in his pocket.
Yeah. But, because there is that, there is always, and we have said that before, there is many a coach that won't teach you the last little bit because they are on the fear of getting beat by the students, where it's a natural thing to protect. And it took a certain arrogance, from you, from me, to teach and say, we're going to show you everything we have. We're going to teach you the very best way, and we're going to beat you.
Yeah, I want to beat you at your best. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to tell you everything I'm doing, and I'm going to beat you anyway. Yeah, that's definitely always been. Even when I was at Winfield, I was showing the other guys what I was doing. It's like, it's a competition. Like, here's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's what I told them. I go, I want to beat you anyway. I don't want to beat you because you didn't know something I knew. I want to beat you, because I drive better than you. So yeah, good fun. Well, buddy, that was a treat. I really want to thank you. You know how much respect I have for you. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I think we talked about some cool stuff, and that's all I want to do. I just want to say things, just like in my book. I just want to say things that other people don't say in their podcasts about driving or when they talk about driving. And you were the perfect guest for that. So anyone that wants coaching or anything to that line, or you just want like the best co-driver you can ever get, call up Nico Ronde. You do have a website? It's ronde.com, is it? Or what's your website?
Ronde.com. But NicoRonde.com, or my email is nico.ronde@gmail. My Instagram, my Facebook, you'll find me.
And Ronde is RONDET, correct?
Correct. RONDET, Nico, NICO.
Yeah. So just to make sure you get the spelling right.
We haven't talked about flying yet. All
right, we're going to save that for the next one. We'll do a whole podcast where we don't talk about racing. We talk about skiing, mountain biking, flying.
Yeah, we can do that.
I'll probably sneak some sailing in there, since that's been the latest thing I'm terrible at. That's really cool. All right, buddy. Thank you again. I hope everyone out there really enjoyed this podcast as much as obviously Nico and I did. We did it just for us. And if you get something out of it, that's awesome too. But it was really, really fun. And Nico, I know this isn't the last we'll see of you on the Optimum Drive podcast. I'd love to have you back some other time, just as we discussed. And good luck racing karts tomorrow. And thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today. And thanks everyone for tuning in. If you made it to the end, good job. That's pretty impressive. But usually in my podcast, the good stuff is in the last half. We really start getting into racing and driving. And so hopefully you made it through. And if you did, hopefully you got something out of it. And let me know in the comments if you did. So with that, Nico, thank you again. Take care, my friend. I'm sure we'll talk very soon. And we'll see you next time at the Optimum Drive podcast. Thanks, everybody.